Chapter 13. Little Cicada. Chapter 13. Little Cicada. Without looking at Li Jianheng, Xiao Qia righted the lid of the teacup slowly with his fingers. He said, "Don't fret." Li Jianheng sat back in his chair, scared out of his wits. He heard the Empress Dowager ask, "His Majesty the Emperor is here, and the patrol is strict. How could a person drown for no reason?" Ji Lei said, "To reply, Your Majesty, this humble subject has already sent someone to take the corpse to await the coroner's examination. We will know the details soon." "What do you mean?" Being chronically sick had laden Emperor Xianda's brows with an aura of gloom. He said, "Don't tell me there is something fishy about his death?" Ji Lei said, "Your Majesty, he was bruised all over when we fished him out of the water. It's clear that he had received a beating. Although Xiaofuzi was a court eunuch of the palace, he didn't hold any important post in the 24 Yamen. He was merely His Majesty's personal eunuch. If he was tortured before he died, then I'm afraid the murderer might be plotting something major." Supporting himself on the table, Emperor Xianda stood up and said coldly, "I have only just stepped out of the palace, and already there are people who can't wait." "Your Majesty." Hai Liangyi stepped out and kneeled to say, "The Imperial Guards and the 8 great training divisions are on rotation duty with one another today to conduct patrols. If the murderer was really plotting something, how would he have dared to do such a sloppy work of it? Xiaofuzi usually took on the job of leaving the palace to make purchases. It's not impossible for him to make personal enemies out of others elsewhere." Secretariat Elder Hua Xiqian, who had been sitting upright without moving, said, "Rensure, too, you can't put it that way. A man who dares to strike before His Majesty clearly has no regard for His Majesty and all the officials present. Who among the ordinary commoners outside the palace would have this kind of guts?" Xiao Qia sat still as the gears turned in his mind. At the 3rd quarter of the hour of Wu, 3 Chen Yang had dragged Xiaofuzi into the woods. In just an hour, for the eunuchs serving the dishes at the start of the banquet and the 8 great training divisions taking over the patrol would pass by. All those present today were bigwigs. No one would remember everyone who left their seats to change attire, drink tea, or make a trip to the latrine. What's more, the accompanying soldiers and eunuchs all had the right to move around the garden too. Someone only needed to give Xiaofuzi a light kick in that time span of an hour, and he would have drowned in the pond. Looking at the situation now, the thorny issue was not explaining how the bruises on Xiaofuzi's body came about. Instead, it was that Ji Lei had changed the course of investigation and turned this murder case into a suspect case for rebellion. Xiao Qia tapped his fingertips on the lid. This fire must never burn its way to Prince Chu. The Emperor was gravely ill now, and the imperial physician was at his wits' end. No one could even predict the day of his demise. However, Emperor Xianda had no heirs. Once the unexpected happens, Li Jianheng would be the next one in line to the throne. What happened today was all because he did not think things through. It was too brazen for Li Jianheng to leave his seat. This was something he could not simply dismiss with a perfunctory excuse. The Shao clan was treading on thin ice. If they were to be suspected of being implicated in the tussle for the imperial throne again, then the 120,000 military forces of Li Bei would be the executioner blade on Shao Jiming's neck. This matter had come bearing down on him too fast. It was already staring at him right in the face. He could not let it continue burning. Xiao Qia suddenly flung down the teacup, shattering it. The clear, crisp sound of clatter rang out, attracting the sidelong glances of everyone at the banquet. Li Jianheng looked at him in apprehension and said, Suan." Xiao Qia stood up and strode swiftly towards the Emperor. He kneeled and said in a clear voice, "Your Majesty, this humble subject dare not hide this from you. I was the one who ordered my men to hit him." Emperor Xianda stared at him and asked, "He was a court eunuch. What grudge did he have with you that you would be so ruthless to him?" Ji Lei also looked askance at him and said, "Your Excellency Xiao, this matter is one of grave importance. You mustn't take the blame for someone else because of some personal relationship. It's no big deal, actually. Xiao Qia said frivolously. Besides, this humble subject doesn't think it's a crime. So what if I beat an insignificant and lowly eunuch to death? I'm a second-grade viceroy of the imperial army. Don't tell me I still have to put up with this condescending dog of a slave? For the second young master to be this furious, Hua Xiqian said, I'm afraid it's not just any typical grudge. It's just that Xiaofuzi normally had no dealings with you. So why are you this furious? Secretariat Elder doesn't know it, but, Xiao Qia said, when I rode my horse to the military drill ground a few months ago, this dog sedan blocked my way. He looked like a big shot. If he had not lifted the curtain, I'd have thought him to be Pangongong. I rebuked him a few words, and he mouthed off at me. I'm a real man, and yet I was humiliated by a wretched castrated eunuch right there on the street. If it had been someone else, I doubt they would have been able to swallow this humiliation either. Pan Rugi was still waiting on the emperor at the outer side. The entire banquet of attendees all wiped their sweat for Xiao Qia when they heard him say, castrated. As Emperor Xianda turned it over in his mind, the Empress Dowager said, even so, killing at the slightest provocation is not what a gentleman should do. Their words seemed to hit Pan Rugi's sore point. The gray-haired man kneeled with tears in his eyes and said, slaves like us are all lowly creatures. How could we be compared to the second young master? Her Majesty is already showing us favor with her compassion. Xiaofuzi had been spoiled so rotten that he didn't know to observe the etiquette when encountering military officials of the court. Even with the second young master's advice, he remained unrepentant. This is all this slave's fault for being tardy in my teaching of the child. 5. He spoke in such a conciliatory and accommodating way. Yet, the law stipulated that eunuchs had to dismount and step back to kneel and kowtow in a greeting whenever they saw a minister or major court official. The Empress Dowager was a staunch Buddhist, so she was displeased with the killing of lives. As such, she said to Emperor Xianda, there has been a saying since time immemorial that all men are equal in the eyes of the law. Xiao Qia is so violent and wild. By all sentiment and reason, we can't let him off too lightly. Besides, the Xiao clan are all loyal and upright men. The Prince of Libei sent his son into Kudu to be raised close to your Majesty. If we indulge him to the extent that he thinks so highly of himself, then I'm afraid that we would have let down the Prince of Libei who has entrusted him to us. Ji Lei was indignant. He was unwilling to let the matter go this easily, so he said, the second young master has always been on friendly terms with Prince Chu. Now that he has done such a thing, His Highness, this humble subject still has something to say. I might be the one who beat him up, but I didn't kill him. Your Majesty, this humble subject originally had the intent to kill him to vent my fury. But when His Highness Prince Chu knew of this matter, he persuaded me against it. This humble subject was the one who ordered the guards today to drag him over and give him a thrashing on the quiet. Who would expect His Highness Prince Chu to get an inkling of what was happening midway and leave his seat to save Xiaofuzi's life? With His Highness giving counsel at the side, this humble subject would not dare to make His Highness lose face, no matter how bold this humble subject may be. So, this humble subject let Xiaofuzi off. As for how he drowned, this humble servant finds it strange too. Who would want to vent my hatred on my behalf and do such an ill-advised thing? Your Excellency Ji. Xiao Qia turned to Ji Lei, his eyes faintly gleaming with delight. The imperial guards are usually meticulous and impeccable in their work. Today, he was lying by the side of the road. Yet he could still dodge the patrol squads and fall into the pond. Perhaps he was the one himself who could not tell the direction with his head covered and rolled down. Hailiangi said, that's true. Such a big man fell into the pond, and the imperial guards never realized it even though they were coming and going on patrol. If assassins were to infiltrate Xiuan today, the imperial guards probably wouldn't even notice it either. How would Ji Lei dare to muddy the water further? He kowtowed in a panic several times and said, "Your Majesty! The Imperial Guards can't do anything about it either. The Imperial Guards rotate with the 8th Great Training Division today to conduct patrols, so we have to organize the manpower carefully when relieving each squad. We wouldn't dare to neglect even the tiniest detail." The seal-holding commander-in-chief of the 8 Great Training Divisions, Shi Guan, kneeled as well and said, "That's indeed the rule. The 8 Great Training Divisions do not dare to make light of it either. The rotation of the patrol follows a fixed schedule. It's not impossible for someone to memorize it and seize the chance to kill Xiaofuzi. This is a personal feud between a court official and eunuch. It should be handed over to someone to investigate exactly how many people have a grudge against this Xiaofuzi." "Investigate." Emperor Xianda laughed scornfully and suddenly threw the teacup at Gu Zian. He said in a towering rage, "Someone died right under your noses. Instead of self-reflecting, you just want to shirk responsibility. To think I actually put my safety in all your hands. You." Emperor Xianda's voice went hoarse as he covered his mouth and started coughing again. He was so enraged that he had to support himself with the table before he toppled over backward. "Your Majesty!" The imperial concubines around him let out shrill cries of alarm. The banquet was thrown into complete chaos. "Summon the imperial physician, quick!" The Empress Dowager held on to someone for support and said in reproach. Li Jianheng looked as if he had seen his own mother when he saw Shao Qie again. He said, "My dear brother, you scared me just now." Shao Qie said, "I have been kneeling for so long that I'm starving now. Bring me some snacks." Li Jianheng waved his hand to motion for someone to hurry and get the snacks. He stood with Shao Qie at the base of the long veranda in Xiuan and looked at those bright lights in the palace hall. "If His Majesty regains consciousness, he will summon you." Li Jianheng said, "How did that Xiaofuzi die? I'm really down on my luck." Shao Qie ate his snacks with herbal tea. It was hard to say with this matter. Pan Rugi has always favored Xiaofuzi. If someone had deliberately wanted to take Xiaofuzi's life, how could his timing coincide so perfectly with Li Jianheng's beating? If it wasn't a deliberate attempt to kill Xiaofuzi, then it was a spur-of-the-moment decision. Yet, it would have been far more advantageous to untie him than to kill him. The thing was that Pan Rugi and Ji Lei reacted way too swiftly. Since the man was already dead, they might as well make full use of him. If they could frame it on Prince Chu, they would be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. "Has His Majesty summoned anyone to his chamber recently to spend the night?" 6 Shao Qie asked offhandedly. "Yeah," Li Jianheng answered. "The one he favors the most lately is the lady of the Wei clan. The Empress Dowager likes her too." Shao Qie looked thoughtful. It was already dark by now, but no one dared to leave. All of them stood in small groups on the veranda and waited for Emperor Xianda to regain consciousness. Shi Guan left the garden midway. When he returned, he received the Empress Dowager's orders and headed into the room to wait. After another hour, Shao Qie suddenly saw the 8 Great Training Division guards leading an errand runner, who was dressed in clean cotton clothing, in from the side gate. "Who is that?" Shao Qie asked. Li Jianheng craned his neck and said, "An errand runner. There aren't many errand runners in Xiuan. But what are they bringing an errand runner here for?" With the help of the dim light from the lantern, a sharp-eyed Shao Qie saw that the errand runner had an ugly appearance with burned scars. He did not know why, but his heart suddenly leaped as an ominous speculation took hold in his mind and lingered. "An errand runner of Xiuan," Shao Qie said. "Xiuan is a noble ground used to receive the emperor. It is a requirement for all those who wait upon him to look refined. Where would such a person come from?" After a while, Pan Rugi strode out of the door and shouted, "Summon the 8th son of the Shin clan. Hurry over for an audience with the emperor." An uproar broke out amidst the throng of officials. The sound of discussion rose multifold. There had not been a final judgment on whether Shun Wei had been guilty of treason after his death, but the name of Shun Wei had already spread across the country. The wounds of Zhongbua had yet to heal, and the blame for the defeat of the troops still existed. The fact that the remaining member of the Shun clan had undeservingly got to keep his life had already roused resentment at the frontiers. So why was he still permitted to come out now? "What's going on?" a stunned Li Jianheng said. "Don't tell me they discovered something? Suen, there's enmity between you and him. Both of you see red whenever you meet. For the sake of the Shao clan's face, they shouldn't have let him out." Shao Chia said nothing. He merely shifted his gaze to the entrance and stared at it closely. In less than half an hour, the guard at the lead strode in. A man followed not far behind him. After 5 years, this man's hair has grown long. It hung behind him, secured with a crude wooden hairpin. He did not wear a crown. His old wide-sleeved robe sheltered his wrists from view, while the rest that extended out of those sleeves were as fair and lustrous as that of white porcelain. The lantern obstructed Shao Chia's sight. When the man walked out, the teacup in Li Jianheng's hand tumbled off. Li Jianheng muttered aloud distractedly. "You never told me this is how he looks like." Shao Chia's thumb crooked slightly. Shun Zichuan passed through the front of the veranda. At the very instant both of them crossed paths, Shao Chia looked at this man with coldness and detachment. Right that split second, he locked gazes with a pair of eyes that held deep memories. These eyes were narrow and long, with the ends raised and curved into thin arches. Divine light shone in them. Even under the dim light of the lantern, those eyes still looked as if they were hiding the remnant of stars within. In this rush of a moment, Shun Zichuan seemed to let out a hint of a smile at Shao Chia. But it was so faint that there were no traces of it left behind after Shun Zichuan brushed past him, much like the wind of the night, thin and cold. Chapter 14. Praying Mantis. Chapter 14. Praying Mantis. Shun Zichuan followed the man inside and kneeled outside the hanging screen. Emperor Xianda leaned back partially against the head of the bed, while the Empress Dowager sat by the side of the bed. With both hands holding the bowl of medicinal decoction, Pan Rugi retreated a little to reveal Shun Zichuan's figure. Emperor Xianda made an effort to gather himself and said, "The patrol squad of the 8 great training divisions said that they saw your errand runner appear at the side of the pond. I'm asking you, what is he doing there?" Shun Zichuan said, "To reply His Majesty, Uncle Gu was waiting for Fu Gongong from the palace." "On whose orders?" Shun Zichuan paused, then kowtowed. He said, "It was this sinful subject's." Emperor Xianda let out a few coughs and said, "You are being imprisoned in Zhao Zui Temple. Every month, the palace will allocate and deliver food and clothing to you. How would you come to have connections with Xiaofuzi?" His Majesty showed concern and allowed this sinful subject to self-reflect at Zhao Zui Temple. "Not only did His Majesty bestow kindness upon me, but even grant me food. This sinful subject recently came down with a cold. Coupled with my old ailment, it became increasingly harder for me to get up every day." Shun Zichuan looked sorrowful at this point. "Although the palace deliver my meals, they don't send medicine. Uncle Gu has been on duty in Zhao Zui Temple for a long time." Taking pity on this sinful subject, he asked Fu Gongong, who left the palace to procure goods, for some medicine from the palace on behalf of this sinful subject. And that's how this sinful subject came to entrust Uncle Gu again, this time to beseech Fu Gongong to buy some blessing oil lamps, one for me. "You have no family?" the Empress Dowager asked. "Why do you need oil lamps to pray for blessings?" "This sinful subject is aware of my heinous sins, so I've been praying by the lamp in the temple day and night for His Majesty and Her Majesty. At the same time, I've also been chanting sutras all day for the loyal martyrs who lost their lives at the Battle of Zhongbua's Chaushur," Shun Zichuan said devoutly. He continued, "Having planted some vegetables on the temple's grounds, this sinful subject entrusted Uncle Gu to sell them for some money at the morning market. The illness of this sinful subject is already in such a state. Instead of using the money to buy medicine, I might as well get some blessing oil lamp." The Empress Dowager gave a long sigh. "Although you are guilty of sin, it is not unpardonable." Emperor Xianda wearily closed his eyes and said, "Xiaofuzi is now dead. Do you know anyone who has a dispute with him?" Shun Zichuan shook his head and said softly, "Although this sinful subject might be bold enough to beseech Fu Gongong to buy lamps, I have never seen Fu Gongong before or exchange letters with him. What about you?" Emperor Xianda motioned to Ji Gang. "Tell me, has he mentioned anything to you?" Ji Gang did not dare to look at the emperor directly in the face. Like any other ordinary errand-runner, he answered with fright and fear. "To reply, Your Majesty, whenever Fu Gongong left the palace, it was all for purchasing purposes. With such a busy schedule, he would usually send those serving him to meet this humble one." On hearing this, Emperor Xianda cast a self-mocking glance at Pan Rugi, who stood as still as a wooden statue. Ji Gang went on to say, "But there was a time when this humble servant greeted Fu Gongong before his sedan and heard him mention something to his attendants about His Highness flying into a rage out of humiliation and wanting to create trouble for him. At that time, this humble servant was anxious to give Fu Gongong the money to buy the oil lamps, and so I moved closer to him. But Fu Gongong was busy that day too, so he told this humble one to come to Xiuan today to wait for him. That was how the military gentleman came to see this humble servant pacing up and down by the pond." Pan Rugi said, "Did you hear it correctly? That it was Your Highness and not someone else." Ji Gang kowtowed repeatedly and said, "I dare not deceive His Majesty. Many people saw this humble servant in the market that day. All you have to do is to ask around to know that this humble one isn't lying." Emperor Xianda said nothing for a long time. The smell of medicine in the room was heavy. The Empress Dowager covered her nose and mouth with her handkerchief and leaned over to say to Emperor Xianda, "Your Majesty, whether or not Xiaofuzi's death was premeditated, you can't just listen to Shao Qia's side of the story. The case happened just a few steps away from Your Majesty. If it was Prince Chu who wanted Xiaofuzi's life like this person said, then why would Shao Qia prevaricate to such an extent?" "Your Majesty," Pan Rugi said softly as well, "Xiaofuzi's life is insignificant. Never mind if Prince Chu killed him because of personal grudges. But I'm afraid things are not that simple. His Majesty hardly steps out of the palace, while Xiaofuzi frequently did so. Why didn't Prince Chu choose some other day? Why did it have to be today?" Emperor Xianda suddenly broke out in a violent coughing fit again. He pushed aside Pan Rugi's hand and used his own handkerchief to wipe away the bloodstains. Without looking at anyone, he said, "Jianheng is my own brother. I understand his temperament best. Since this case is already at this stage, then let Ji Lei settle it." This all happened because Xiaofuzi used his own position to lord it over others and overstepped his boundaries when it came to the rules of propriety, thereby causing resentment and envy among others. Punish Shao Qia by grounding him in his residence for half a month, and punish Ji Lei and Shi Guan by docking their salaries for 3 months. Pan Rugi, go relay the message. Once you are done, dismiss them." This, Pan Rugi looked at the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager said nothing. Thus, Emperor Xianda looked at the Empress Dowager and said earnestly, "Imperial Mother, we are currently in troubled times. Autumn is approaching, and the frontier is in a precarious position. Trade conflicts at the frontier are increasing day after day. Libei Qidong and the Bianjuan Commandery all need to stabilize and maintain the soldiers' morale. If we pursue this matter, and it ends up implicating too many people and causing casualties at the frontier, then the ones to suffer will be the common folk. Although the pain of Zhongbua has passed, its humiliation has yet to be avenged. Imperial Mother, it's not advisable to drag this matter on for too long, lest we lose the faith of the commoners." Expressing concern, the Empress Dowager tucked in the quilt for Emperor Xianda and said, It's truly a blessing for the Empire that His Majesty is still worrying about state affairs when His Majesty has yet to recover. Pan Rugi, go. Pan Rugi acknowledged her orders and gingerly retreated out of the door. The Empress Dowager continued. The way I see it, this 8th son of the Shen clan truly wants to repent and mend his ways. He is completely different from Shen Wei. He is a child you can use. Emperor Xianda said, his health isn't good. I'm afraid he's unable to take on any duties. Maybe it'd be better for him to remain in the temple for recuperation. However, the Empress Dowager slowly put her hand down and said, what His Majesty has said is logical. But he is already out. If we send him back again for no reason, it will inevitably arouse suspicions about the case. Isn't that contrary to what His Majesty wants? Emperor Xianda smiled and turned to Shen Zichuan. He said, the Empress Dowager likes and thinks highly of you. You must keep this in mind in the future. Don't go down the same path that disloyal and unfilial father of yours did. Let's send you to the Imperial Bodyguards then. The 12 offices have varying degrees of duties. There will naturally be something you can do. Shen Zichuan prostrated himself and kowtowed to thank the Emperor for his benevolence. After all the others had left, Emperor Xianda leaned over the edge of the bed and vomited out all the medicine he had drunk earlier. The quilt covering his hand had been wrung until it was all creased. Under the dim light of the candles in the room, Emperor Xianda's face was ashen. His illness was evidently already at the critical stage. With Pan Rugi supporting her, the Empress Dowager walked along the water veranda. Tu Hua Xiangyi held the newly picked lotus in her hands and followed behind them at a distance together with the other maidservants in attendance. Since his last bout of illness, His Majesty has been acting more and more arbitrarily. The Empress Dowager strolled and said, how can a critically ill person work so hard for the state? As they say, illness comes like an avalanche. 3 Pan Rugi said, His Majesty is getting anxious. Back then, when I chose Jianyun, it was because I valued his gentle and refined ways, as well as his deference and submissiveness. Although he has been ill over the years, he could be said to have done his best. The Empress Dowager looked at Pan Rugi and said, but who would anticipate that he would be so fearful of the Shao clan? Every time he has to make a choice, he would always prefer not to offend anyone. But how in the world would things always go the way he wishes it to be? When all is said and done, your orders are the ones we obey when it comes to the matters in Kudu. Pan Rugi said, wait for a few more days for the imperial concubine, Wanyang, for to get pregnant with a son, then your Majesty will no longer need to worry. The Empress Dowager turned her hand over and patted Pan Rugi on the arm. She said meaningfully, before Imperial Concubine Wei is with child, we'll still need you to keep watching over His Majesty's health. Ever since receiving your Majesty's order, Pan Rugi responded, this slave has been paying attention. The people outside had already more or less dispersed by the time Shen Zichuan came out. He walked with Ji Gang in a single file down the stairs and saw Shao Qia leaving on his horse. Wasn't the imperial army written off? Looking at Shao Qia's waist and legs, Shen Zichuan said, but from all appearances, he clearly has not fallen behind on his martial arts. An expert in horseback archery. Ji Gang squinted his eyes and sized him up for a moment. But without exchanging blows with him, I won't know the extent of the lad's strength. If he could already draw the great bow of heaven 5 years ago, then I'm afraid he's even stronger now. Chuan, don't engage in a fight with him unless absolutely necessary. Shen Zichuan did not answer, but he was taken by surprise when the man who was about to turn the corner suddenly reined in his horse and turned back to charge straight at him. Shen Zichuan looked at Shao Qia without dodging or giving way. When Shao Qia's horse was right before him, it suddenly brushed past him. Shen Zichuan's sleeves and robe went fluttering from the gush of wind, falling back down after a moment. What does this case have to do with you? Shao Qia's horse circled around Shen Zichuan. It has nothing to do with me. Shen Zichuan smiled at him again. But it has a great deal to do with the second young master. Pan Rugi lost his lapdog, and I took a tumble. No one benefits from it today, and yet you get to reap from it. Xiao Qia leaned over from his horse and looked at him. How does someone who is a tough cookie still get to be so lucky? It's all by virtue of the second young master's noble aura. Shen Zichuan also looked at him, and said with humility, if it weren't for the move the second young master made, then how would I have made it out? Xiao Qia's eyes were cold. He said, you are well informed. Just a cheap little trick. Shen Zichuan said. Xiao Qia looked at the sky. The gerfalcon had caught a sparrow back, and was hovering in the air to seek its reward. There's no harm in letting you out. Xiao Qia whistled, and the gerfalcon immediately landed on the tile. It stepped on the sparrow and tore it apart. He looked at Shen Zichuan again. Kudu is so big. One has to find entertainment somehow. A noble is truly a noble, Shen Zichuan said. Even the entertainment you seek differs from others. Dining, whining, whoring, and gambling are all beneath your notice. You just had to have your fun with people. However, having fun alone isn't as good as having fun together. How boring would it be if I'm the only one accompanying you? Look at you. Xiao Qia grasped the horsewhip and lifted the corners of his mouth. You are such a delight. Why would I want others to butt in between us? Shen Zichuan said, that would be too much for me to bear. I have even found so many friends for the second young master. Better worry about yourself than worry about me. Xiao Qia retracted his gaze. There are good career prospects in the imperial bodyguards, and Ji Lei thinks so highly of you. I'm sure he will be looking forward to your presence. Shen Zichuan chuckled aloud. He looked at Xiao Qia with smiling eyes and said in a gentle tone, you and I are but birds in a cage. I may have good future prospects, but aren't you having it easy too? I have no worries and concerns, and being all alone, I'm free from constraints. But second young master, can you do the same? Against the backdrop of hanging lanterns on both sides, Shen Zichuan looked increasingly pretty, like that of jade. The gerfalcon finished feeding on flesh and blood and landed back onto Xiao Qia's shoulder. Since we are all caged birds, Xiao Qia flicked away the dust on the gerfalcon's feathers. Then why pretend to be carefree? Shen Zichuan returned to the temple at night. Once he took his medicine, he sat across Grand Mentor Qi in the courtyard with a small table between them. Ji Gang had built a small courtyard in Zhao Zui Temple, and acceded to Grand Mentor Qi's request to plant some bamboo and set up a vegetable garden. It was truly a refreshing experience to be sitting outside on a summer night. His Majesty has no wish to pursue the matter, Shi Zichuan said, just so he could protect Prince Chu. That was why he allowed me out. Teacher truly has incredible foresight. Incredible or not, it's still too early to come to a verdict yet. Grand Mentor Qi tapped the chess piece on the table and clicked his tongue. He said, last time, they said that His Majesty had been so sick since the beginning of the year that he could not get up. He is now in the prime of his life, and there is the Imperial Academy of Medicine to take care of him. And yet he is even weaker now than he was in his former residence. 5. It may well be said that Pan Rugi deserves the credit for this. Ji Gang squatted at the entrance grinding a stone. He said, his fury was most likely directed at them. Even Ji Lei was punished with them. Obviously, he has been harboring hatred against them for a long time. If one feels that time is running out for him, then he will grow bolder. Grand Mentor Qi said, all along, he has been an emperor who spends his entire life making concessions for the sake of overall interest. The Empress Dowager doesn't like Prince Chu, but there is only Prince Chu left to ascend to the throne. Today, Ji Lei kept incriminating Prince Chu. If this was because Pan Rugi put him up to it, the bitterness of the medicine lingered in Shen Zichuan's mouth. He scrunched up his forehead and said, then, I'd believe it. Since Pan Rugi has the intent to send Prince Chu to his doom, It must be because he no longer has any concerns about future consequences. There is another heir in the palace. One who is far easier to manipulate than Prince Chu. The former emperor exercising self-restraint? Ji Gang blew away the dust and said, I seriously doubt that. Furthermore, if there is really an heir, how would they have been able to hide him all these years? As long as the Li blood runs in him, he's the imperial heir. Grand Mentor Qi knocked the chess piece and said, the former emperor might not have one, but can't the current one beget another? Once his harem gives birth to an heir, and he breathes his last, then the Empress Dowager will be able to carry the baby in her arms to hold court and administer affairs of the state without even hanging up the bead curtain. 6. When the time comes, they can appoint Hua Xiqian as the minister in custody of the infant. By then, Dazhou will truly take on the surname Hua. 7. But Shao Qie is on good terms with Prince Chu, and the Shao clan has everything to gain and nothing to lose if Prince Chu ascends to the throne. Shen Zichuan stroked his chess piece. Li Bei will not simply sit idle and do nothing. As long as Prince Chu is still alive, Xiao Jiming and Lu Guangbai from the Bianjuan Commandery can command their troops to storm Kudu. How could the 8 great training divisions afford to fight this battle? Grand Mentor Qi pressed down on the small table with his elbows and scratched his messy hair. He said, Lanzhao, 8, how muddle-headed are you? You think the Empress Dowager wouldn't have thought of that? Then what would they want Shao Qie 5 years ago for? With Shao Qie in their hands, Xiao Jiming would not dare to make a rash move. Kudu's 8 training divisions can't win if they come up against Li Bei's armored cavalry, but what about Qidong's garrison troops? There is no reason for the Qi clan to get involved in this fight. Just for the sake of the words, loyalty to the sovereign, Qi Juin would still have to deploy the troops to stop Xiao Jiming. Seeing Shen Zichuan contemplating it in silence, Ji Gang said, Isn't the current emperor still alive? So why worry about it? What's more crucial is tomorrow. Tomorrow, Chuaner will join the imperial bodyguards, right under Ji Lei's command. I'm worried. That's why I said I didn't have incredible foresight, Grand Mentor Qi said irritably. His Majesty assigned Lanzhao to the imperial bodyguards to achieve his own purpose and to acquiesce to Her Majesty's wish. But does he really not remember who was the one who interrogated Lanzhao in the imperial prison? What do you think he's planning by having adversaries come face to face with one another? There's still something I want to ask you, Ji Gang. When you found Xiaofuzi today, was he really still breathing? Ji Gang wiped the stone with his fingertip. After a moment of silence he said, It's hard to say. The timing was too tight for me to take a careful look. That's right. Grand Mentor Qi looked at Shen Zichuan. Think about it carefully. If Xiaofuzi was already dead before we could lay our hands on him, then who did it? Chapter 15, Oriole. Chapter 15. Oriole. The next day was the day Shen Zichuan ought to make a trip down to the imperial bodyguards to receive his post. It coincided with the day Shi Guan's younger brother of the same parents, Shi Hongxian, hosted a banquet. He had invited all the up-and-coming scholars and promising talents in Kudu to have a civilized discourse at the Chaodong Tavern. Shi Hongxian was an obese man. When he sat down, someone had to attend to him at the side and fan him. Grasping on to a bamboo fan, he said, This year is this humble one's lucky year. Although I did not get to invite Yanqing Wan, I managed to invite Yuanzhua. Xue Xiuzhua had to attend to his official duties, so he could not make it this day. The Yuanzhua Shi Hongxian mentioned was the current Secretariat Elders, Hai Liaoyi, beloved disciple, Yao Wenyu. These 3 men could address each other with such familiarity as they were all from the 8 great clans of Kudu and had forged a friendship since childhood. Just then, the bead curtain was lifted, and in walked an elegant scholar as gentle and as pure as jade. He was dressed in a raven blue, wide-sleeved robe with slanting collars, along with a Zhaowen bag too hanging on his waist. On hearing that, he merely smiled. The various Confucian scholars 3 at the feast rose in a welcome. For a moment, the sounds of conventional greetings being exchanged rang out. Yao Wenyu said his greeting to them one at a time. It was only after he invited everyone to take their seats that he sat down and responded, "We meet every year. How am I worthy of the 2 words, rare presence?" As humble as he was, none of those present dared to belittle him. Because Yao Wenyu was the child prodigy of Kudu in his early years. He composed poems at 8 years of age, and eulogies 4 and proses 5 at 12. He was the jade, the old master of the Yao clan held in his palms. In order not to let his talents wane, he took Hai Liangyi as his teacher. Hai Liangyi was, by nature, inflexible and stern. To this day, he only had this one student, one that he prized greatly. After the small talk, they began to discuss the current situation. Shi Hongxian waved his hand to signify to his attendant to stop fanning him and said, "There is indeed something strange going on lately in Kudu. I wonder if the various brothers still remember the prince of Jianxing, Shen Wei, who set himself on fire for fear of punishment 5 years ago? The vile man who colluded with the enemies and cowered without fighting." One of them seated in the row straightened up and said, "He should have been beheaded under the law. Even executing his entire clan wouldn't be too much. It is regrettable that His Majesty is so benevolent that he just had to spare the life of that last remaining member of the Shen clan. This morning, I heard that he had been released. The evidence for Shen Wei's crime is conclusive. As the son of a criminal official whose troops had suffered a defeat, how could he take up a post? How do they expect the virtuous talents from all over to accept this?" "Exactly," Shi Hongxian said. "How is this going to work out? There has never been such a precedent before. Most likely, it's Her Majesty who wants to protect him." Someone else said, "I have long heard that this remaining member has some relationship with the Hua clan. But how could personal relationships prevail over state laws? Isn't this a violation of the law itself?" Shi Hongxian sighed heavy-hearted. "I'm afraid this will set a precedent that will give all the future heirs of officials guilty of crimes a loophole to exploit." This immediately stirred up the Confucian scholars. Owing to the severity of Shen Wei's crimes, they could not allow Shen Zichuan to be released. "What does Yuanzhua think?" Yao Wenyu drank his tea and said amiably, "I haven't been in the capital for a long time, so I am not aware of the details. I'm not in the position to say a word." Shi Hongxian said in understanding, "That's right. You are often away for studies, so you aren't aware of what's happening in Kudu." Someone among them spoke, "All of us here are learned men who are widely read in the classics and literature. We are all men with a sense of honor and shame, and we are all well acquainted with the law. We mustn't simply sit and do nothing." Shi Hongxian said, "Then, what should we do?" That person answered, "We are all students of the Imperial College. 6. If the public sentiment is roused, then His Majesty would have to reconsider it. Why not let us return and kneel together before Mingli Hall to beseech His Majesty to retract his order and punish the remaining member of the Shen clan severely?" Sounds of assent rose among those at the feast. Shi Hongxian clapped his hands and said in commendation, "Excellent! All of you here are indeed the pillars of the country. You will be remembered throughout the ages for this kneel today. This humble one is ashamed. Although I'm not a student of the Imperial College, I'm still willing to join all of you." The Confucian scholar who had spoken earlier said, "That wouldn't do. Brother Hongshuan's elder brother is the seal-holding commander-in-chief of the 8 great training divisions. If you get implicated in this matter, then you would only stand to lose. Gentlemen, let's us be the ones to go." As the feast came to an end, Yao Wenyu called the shopkeeper to steam some tender and palatable meat dishes. As he waited, he listened to the whisperings of the Confucian scholars who had gone downstairs. "What, Yuanzhua the unpolished jade? 7, isn't he just a coward? Look at him earlier. He didn't even dare to say a word. How can he be compared to Brother Hongshuan's benevolence?" Yao Wenyu sent a pine nut to his mouth and let loose a soundless laugh. However, he did not step out to contend with them. By the time he came out after his meat bun was ready, the scholars had already more or less dispersed. Shi Hongxian said, Yuanjue, shall I give you a lift? No, thanks. Yao Wenyu lifted the meat in his hand. I'm heading for teacher's residence. Both men bid each other farewell. Shi Hongxian looked at Yao Wenyu's departing back and sneered for a moment before he said, Let's go. On the other side, Shun Zichuan had already arrived at the Imperial Bodyguard's courtyard. He strode across the threshold and earned himself the gaze from everyone all around. The entire compound of hurrying and busying Imperial bodyguards just had to catch a glimpse at him even when they were just passing by. The one leading the way was Gu Qingqing. He took Shun Zichuan to the duty records room and said, The Imperial bodyguards are sorted into 4 groups of men. The first group is selected from civilian households, 8 where their sister is the female head of household 9 who sweeps 10 in the palace. The brother would then come to the Imperial bodyguards and put on a temporary waste token. 11 Although he is exempt from service, he is not paid a salary. An example of this group is Xiaowu. The second group are those who have received a recommendation by the Palace Gonggong, called Conferment by Eunuch S12 Recommendation. A case in point is the Commander-in-Chief. The third are those born of military households, with the position inherited. I'm a prime example of this. The fourth group are those with specialized skills and talents in different fields. These are chosen by His Majesty himself irrespective of their backgrounds. This category of men are all very formidable. You will naturally get your chance to meet them in the future. 113 As Gu Qingqing spoke, he lifted the hanging screen and informed him, This is the place where you need to register in the official records to receive your post. When Shun Zichuan entered, the noise in the records room came to an abrupt halt. All the Imperial bodyguards with different attires and different waist tokens turned their heads over. A strange silence descended upon the hall. Shun Zichuan, the man sitting behind the table with his legs crossed, pushed aside the book before him and looked at him. That's you, huh? Shun Zichuan saw him dressed in a flying fish attire. 14 Imperial bodyguards, whose ranks were not of assistant regional commander and above, were not allowed to wear this attire. So he gave a slight bow and replied, That's me. This man's hair was hanging over his forehead, and his stubble had yet to be tidied. His behavior and bearing were rather unconventional. He touched his chin and smiled. As expected of the son of a dancer courtesan. Shun Wei's extravagant spending all just to win the smile of the beauty back then had not been in vain. Qingqing, give him the token. Saying so, he tossed the token on the table that had already been prepared to Gu Qingqing. Gu Qingqing caught the token and handed it to Shun Zichuan. He said, Lanzhao, this is the Judge 15 of the Imperial Bodyguards. He made a special trip here today just to deliver the token to you. This humble servant is Qiao Tianyao. Having said that, Qiao Tianyao motioned for Shun Zichuan to look at his token. Shun Zichuan turned the waist token over and looked at Qiao Tianyao again. Qiao Tianyao said, The domesticated elephant's office, is it? That's where you will be going. Qingqing will lead you there later. But first, there are some rules I have to tell you. Our Imperial Bodyguards tokens are as precious as the tokens from the 8 great training divisions. When you are not on duty on your days off, you have to keep it properly. You cannot lend it out to outsiders. Although everyone is assigned to duties in the 12 offices, those aren't your main job. Our job is to serve His Majesty. We do whatever His Majesty tells us to do. Other than the assignments in the 12's office, we also have to take turns to serve as eyes and ears. If something major happens, such as our arrest of you 5 years ago, we will need His Majesty's Imperial Edict. 16 Only when we have the document and the special tokens for arrests in hand that we can proceed. Allocation for any missions we get will not be decided by me or the Commander-in-Chief. Instead, everyone will draw lots and let the lots decide. 17G Gang had briefed Shen Zichuan on this before. So he nodded his head and said nothing. One last thing. Xiao Tianya stood up and looked around everyone in the hall. He said, "The Imperial bodyguards are all of one mind. Once you hang our waist token, you are our brother. All kinds of grudges in the past will disperse with the wind. There will be no secret attempts to frame or make a fool of our own brother. If there is, and you are discovered, then all your tokens will be revoked with your names struck off, and you will all be kicked into the Imperial prison to be dealt with severely." Everyone around them turned their gazes away and focused on their own work. Satisfied, Xiao Tianya turned and said to Shen Zichuan, "You may go." Shen Zichuan bowed in farewell and followed Gu Qingqing out of the door. "I thought it would be an Imperial regalia post like the fan office." 18 Gu Qingqing looked at Shen Zichuan and said, "The domesticated elephant's office works fine too. I have had many conjectures too." Shen Zichuan smiled and said, "But I never thought that I'd be going to raise elephants. The domesticated steed's office is currently a good place to be posted to. The golden saddled horses are all raised on behalf of the nobles. It's easy to get a recommendation for a promotion once you have contacts with them and go on to be on familiar terms with them. As for the domesticated elephant's office," Gu Qingqing had an odd expression on his face. "It's not really an idle job. You even have to attend morning court sessions. 19 and those batches of elephant lords are really a pain in the ass to serve. But the commander-in-chief hardly goes there, so it won't be easy for him to create trouble for you." The domesticated elephant's office was close to Mingli Public Road in Kudu's imperial city, which led right to Kaling River. When the weather was hot, they had to herd the elephants over to the river to drink and bathe. Not only that, during the daily morning court sessions, they also had to lead 6 elephants to stand at both sides of the imperial stairs. If there was a major festive court meet or a hunting extravaganza, then they had to increase the number of elephants. These elephants would not only attend morning court sessions like the morning court officials did, but they would also be dismissed from court sessions together with the morning court officials. But while the morning court officials would find it a challenge to recuperate if they were to fall ill, the elephants could, since they were just like the imperial bodyguards who took turns to be on duty. 320 Shen Zichuan had never even raised a dog before, and now they were giving him the impossible challenge of raising elephants. All he could say was that life's unpredictable. Both men were still on their way when they heard someone running after them. Gu Qingqing looked back and asked, "What's the matter?" The imperial bodyguard who came after them looked at Shen Zichuan and said with a solemn expression, "The token is suspended. He can't take up the post today. Return to the records room quickly." Shen Zichuan asked, "Is there a new deployment order from the palace?" "There's no new order from the palace. But 3,000 students of the Imperial College are on hunger strike and kneeling in protest to beseech His Majesty to retract his order and to deal with the Shen clan severely." Gu Qingqing's countenance changed as he looked at Shen Zichuan. Having been grounded for punishment, Xiao Qia lay on the couch and flipped through the storytelling script. 21 Even when he heard Chen Yang announce Prince Chu's arrival, he could not be bothered to get up. "I'm being grounded." Xiao Qia ate a fruit without raising his head. "So why are you swaggering in this brazenly?" Li Jianheng tossed down Xiao Qia's viceroy token and said in agitation, "Suan, something big has happened." Xiao Qia's eyelid twitched. Li Jianheng continued, 3,000 students have kneeled to ask His Majesty to punish Shen Zichuan severely. They kneeled until it was dark and went on a hunger strike to force His Majesty to retract his orders. When His Majesty heard of this during dinner, he was so angry that he collapsed back onto the bed again. Xiao Qia looked at that waste token and said, "Toss it out. The 8 great training divisions won't break the students up, so they told me to deliver the token back to you. If the Imperial Army can disperse the students tonight, then your score with them will be written off." Anxious, Li Jianheng stamped his foot and said, The Imperial Army can't do anything else, but isn't it easy to deal with a few students who don't even have the strength to truss a chicken? It's a good thing. Xiao Qia lifted the book to cover his face. After a moment of silence, he said through clenched teeth, "And what a fucking good thing it is." The students of the Imperial College were future candidates for the Imperial Court, and they could influence the way the wind blew among the local Confucian scholars. Shi Guan knew that they were hot potatoes he could not lay a hand on. If Xiao Qia really moved these 3,000 students today, then the first one to be buried under their brushes and spit in the future would be him. Where is Shun Zichuan now? Xiao Qia suddenly sat up and asked with his hands on his knees. I heard that he went to the Imperial Bodyguard's records room early in the morning. Li Jianheng looked at him putting on his clothes and followed up with a question. Where are we going? Are we going to look for Shen Zichuan? Xiao Qia went down the stairs where Chen Yang had already prepared his horse. He mounted it and spurred it on to depart. Chapter 16, Rainstorm. Chapter 16, Rainstorm. The wind rose a while later, followed by the fall of rain. Xiao Qia braved the rain and galloped his horse through it. He arrived at the Imperial College just in time to hear Gao Zhongxiong shouting with his head raised. As long as the traitor is not executed, the wrath of the public will not be appeased. The students at the back kowtowed and echoed in unison. As long as the traitor is not executed, the wrath of the public will not be appeased. The rain spattered upon the earth, soaking the students' robes and hair. Xiao Qia reined in his horse, and the horse trod its hooves on the same spot. He looked at them for a moment, then said in a loud voice, "What have you been doing earlier? If all of you gentlemen here had kneeled to make your case back then when that surviving descendant entered the capital, then he would never have lived to this day." Gao Zhongxiong's chest heaved. He said, "Viceroy, as they say, it's better late than never. This surviving descendant is still wet behind the ears, and he has yet to spread his wings. As long as His Majesty is willing to retract his order and deal with him severely, it will still be a consolation to all the loyal souls of Zhongbua. There is absolutely no reason to rescind an imperial edict of the Son of Heaven," one Xiao Qia said. "By kneeling, you are not beseeching His Majesty to revoke his decree, but forcing him into it. The various gentlemen here are all loyal and filial men of the world. There are 100 ways you can use to make your appeal, so why insist on making such an unwise move?" "Your Excellency." Gao Zhongxiong looked up. "Men who wield brushes die in remonstrations, while men who wield swords die in battles. If we have to watch helplessly as His Majesty is deceived into handling affairs in such a muddle-headed way, then we might as well spill our blood on the Imperial terrace tonight to die for our beliefs." Xiao Qia said, "Using the threat of death at every turn. Is that all civil servants since ancient times are capable of?" The rain intensified. The students did not budge. Xiao Qia dismounted and squatted before Gao Zhongxiong. The heavy rain poured like a waterfall. He leaned in and asked, "Who is the instigator?" With a look of great resolve, Gao Zhongxiong said, "My loyalty to my sovereign is what drives me." Giving off the air of a ruffian, Xiao Qia said, "I don't think so. Of course, if you want to protect an outsider, you can. It's just that your action tonight has implicated all those 3,000 fellow students behind you. If the Emperor flies into a rage and turns tonight into a bloodbath, then you will be no different from that last descendant of the Shen clan. All of you will be sinners condemned through the ages. And this isn't even the scariest thing. What's worse is that His Majesty would still be unwilling to rescind his edict even if your head rolls. You persevered in your studies despite the hardships for 12 years, all just to do the dirty work for another?" Gao Zhongxiong lifted his arm and wiped away the rainwater on his face. He said, "What I'm doing is a matter of loyalty and righteousness. It's completely different from the Shen clan's traitorous act. Even if all 3,000 of us were to die here tonight, even if our blood were to overflow the imperial terrace, we are doing it all for His Majesty." Xiao Qia said, The situation now is that the palace has neither withdrawn its order for Shen Zichuan to take up post, nor have they sent out an imperial edict to appease the students. Do you still not understand His Majesty's intention from this? For each day His Majesty does not retract his decree. Gao Zhongxiong persisted. We will neither eat, rise, nor retreat. The thunderstorm rumbled. Xiao Qie rose to his feet. Chen Yang wanted to hold up an umbrella for him, but he raised his hand to stop him. Rain seeped into his robe. Even the token hanging on his waist was dripping water. Viceroy. Chen Yang suddenly spoke in a soft voice. The imperial bodyguards are here. Xiao Qie turned his head back in the rain and saw Qiao Tianya arriving on his horse. The latter dismounted and cupped his fists together from afar to pay his obeisances. A sudden commotion rose among the students when they saw the red cavalry. This is a knotty issue. It wouldn't do to trouble the viceroy over it. Qiao Tianya held on to his blade and smiled. One of the imperial bodyguards is the target here. So naturally, the imperial bodyguards should be the one to resolve this ourselves. Resolve. Xiao Qie raised his arm almost thoughtlessly and placed it on Qiao Tianya's shoulder. He said, How does the Judge 3 want to resolve this matter? They are just a bunch of unarmed students. There's no need to trouble the imperial bodyguards over them. The Emperor is the highest authority in Kudu. Qiao Tianya looked askance at him. Whoever has the gall to defy His Majesty's orders are the enemies of the imperial bodyguard. Xiao Qie looked at him right in the eyes. After a moment, both men burst into laughter. My man, Xiao Qie said. You are gutsy. It's raining hard and cold. Qiao Tianya tightened his grip on his blade and said, I'll send someone to escort you back to your residence. I just arrived a moment ago. Xiao Qie's hand remained on Qian Tianya's shoulder to hold his arm, which was grasping the hilt of his blade, in place. He was still smiling as he said, There's no harm in staying a little longer. Qiao Tianya said, This matter is a difficult one. Why muddy the waters? Xiao Qie said, It's precisely because it's tough to handle that we can't get rid of them all at once. These students are all great minds of the state. None of us can take responsibility for it if there's one of them less. The man dismounting his horse at the back was dressed in a thin, wide-sleeved garment. He did not carry a blade with him. Sandwiched between the pack of imperial bodyguards, he stood out conspicuously like a sore thumb. Qiao Tianya loosened his grip on his blade and shouted, Lanzhao, come here. Shen Zichuan turned around and exchanged glances with Xiao Qie. Qiao Tianya leisurely shifted Xiao Qie's arm away and said, The Viceroy's worry is valid. However, the imperial bodyguards don't merely know how to bulldoze our way through our jobs. I still have some other arrangements on my end. In a while, the Emperor's order will arrive. Both of you are old friends, aren't you? Lanzhao, stay here with the Viceroy for a moment. He's scared. Shen Zichuan gathered his sleeves and looked at the students in the rain. Xiao Qie took a few glances at him and commented, Your waist token has been hung up pretty fast. Shen Zichuan said, The second young master's token has been returned pretty fast too. Xiao Qie's expression was cold, but he smiled and said, You may seem to be the target of this matter, but the truth is that the real target is the palace. So how's it? Because your gains were too little yesterday, you have to stir up trouble the moment you get out of your cage? Shen Zichuan tilted his head slightly and looked at him with pure, kind eyes. He said, The second young master thinks too highly of me. Where on earth would I have the capability to stir things up? Since the target is the palace, then wouldn't the second young master know better than I, who currently harbor the most desire to see His Majesty fall out with the Hua clan? Xiao Qie said, I don't get what you mean. Circuitous stuff is all beyond my understanding. Shen Zichuan smiled at him and said, We are old acquaintances. You don't have to stand on ceremony with me. Xiao Qie did not answer him. Instead, he offhandedly lifted a finger to flick Shen Zichuan's waist token. He said, The domesticated elephant's office is a good place. You must be happy, huh? I am, Shun Zichuan said. It just happens that I have some experience in taming ferocious beasts. Not really an experience, Xiao Qia said. That was a deep conversation between the same kind. How would I dare to call it such? Shun Zichuan coughed softly and said, if the talks break down and I receive yet another kick, then wouldn't all my previous efforts go to waste? Use your teeth then. Xiao Qia took the umbrella from Chun Yang's hand and held it up above his head. At the same time, he blocked Shun Zichuan and said, you have a sharp tongue and a smart mouth, don't you? So what are you afraid of? I value my life. Shun Zichuan sighed as if with emotion. As they said, the kindness of a drop of water given in times of need should be repaid multifold with a gushing spring. For there is so much more I wish to repay the second young master with. Have you gotten the wrong person? Xiao Qia scoffed. That can't be. Shun Zichuan cast a sidelong glance at Xiao Qia and said calmly to him, I recognize you. Fine then. Xiao Qia looked askance at him as well and said, I want to see how much I owe you too. The voices outside the umbrella were cut off. Both men stood shoulder to shoulder, accentuating the height difference between them. Actually, there is no way you can stay out of this matter. Xiao Qia gazed at the students in the rain. If one dies tonight, there will naturally be someone who will lay the blame on you. There will only be more and not less of the 40,000 souls who have died unjust deaths. Shun Zichuan played it down. Since they are afraid of death, then why be someone else's weapon? Even if someone wants to pin this on me, it doesn't mean I have to plead guilty, do I? Both men fell silent again. Qiao Tianya sat astride under the shed and cracked melon seeds. Seeing as it was almost time, he shook the seeds off his robe and rose to his feet. Sure enough, he saw a sedan chair coming towards them amid the color of the night. The curtain lifted. Unexpectedly, it was Pan Rugi who came. The little eunuch supported Pan Rugi with a hand, while Ji Lei followed at the side holding up an umbrella for him. Wearing a robe with a tiger, mugwort, and 5 poisons 5 mandarin square 6 and a yendun hat 7 on his head, Pan Rugi let Qiao Tianya lead him to the students. Such a heavy downpour. Qiao Tianya reined in his smile and said, to think they actually sent the director to grace us with your presence. Pan Rugi looked askance at Gao Zhongxiong and asked Qiao Tianya, he won't retreat? Qiao Tianya replied, scholars are all bullheaded. They are neither enticed by the carrot nor browbeaten by the stick. Then, I'm afraid the stick isn't hard enough. Pan Rugi had lost his right-handed man yesterday, and he had nowhere to vent all his pent-up anger. With the little eunuch supporting him, he came to stand before Gao Zhongxiong. You are all men who are well read in the classics and literature. How is it that you can't understand the words, overstepping your authority? The affairs of the imperial court are to be discussed in the imperial court itself. It is not something brats like you who are still wet behind the ears can influence. On seeing this well-known lackey of the Hua faction, Gao Zhongxiong could not help but straighten his back and say, every man has a duty to his country. Since the Imperial College students receive a stipend from the sovereign, then they must serve him loyally. Treacherous toadies abound all around His Majesty now. If we still don't, treacherous toadies. Pan Rugi laughed coldly. What a fine way to put it! Who instigated you to slander the Imperial Court and malign His Majesty? A loyal, cut the crap, Pan Rugi suddenly commanded. You act upon the instigation of those with sinister motives and publicly defy the imperial decree. You incite your clique to slander the imperial court and the people. If this man goes unpunished, then what's the use of the law? Men, take him down. Gao Zhongxiong had never expected Pan Rugi to be so daring that he would indiscriminately take others down. He immediately braced himself in the rain and shouted himself hoarse. Who dares to? I was chosen by His Majesty himself to study at the Imperial College. The villain stands before us, and eunuchs endanger the state. The Empress Dowager wields control over the state affairs and refuses to return governance to its rightful master. The ones who should be taken down are treacherous ministers and traitors like you. Drag him away. Ji Lei immediately said in reproach when he saw Pan Rugi enraged. The imperial bodyguards stepped forward to drag him away. Gao Zhongxiong's attempt to climb to his feet was thwarted. He raised his arms in the direction of the palace and shouted, "My death today is truly a remonstration to the death. Since the eunuch wants to kill me, then let him kill." "Your Majesty," Qiao Tianya gripped Gao Zhongxiong by the neck. Unable to breathe, the latter struggled and shouted intermittently, "Your Majesty, the treacherous ministers are in power. Then, what's the point of loyalty and righteousness?" Xiao Qia said inwardly to himself, "Oh shit." What happened next was just as he expected. Sorrow and indignation ran high among the 3,000 students. Life and death had no place here right this instant as it was forced out by this vehement elegy. Rising to their feet in the rainstorm, the students charged at the imperial bodyguards. Eunuchs endanger the state. They pulled their Zhaowen bags, ate off their waists and flung them at Pan Rugi. Bitter cries rang out. Treacherous ministers are in power. Ji Lei hurriedly shielded Pan Rugi and guarded him as he ushered the latter back in a retreat. He chided them furiously, "What are you doing? Staging a rebellion? This is the real traitor to the nation." The students threw themselves against the imperial bodyguards as the imperial bodyguards held them back. Their fingers almost jabbed Ji Lei's face, while specks of saliva sprayed towards them. "Traitor! Traitor!" Xiao Qia swiftly tossed the umbrella to Shun Zichuan and hurried down the stairs. Shun Zichuan stood alone on high ground and watched the chaos with cool detachment. Pan Rugi had been shoved back into his sedan, and Ji Lei even lost his shoe in the melee. Storms are rife in the martial fraternity. From a distance away, Shun Zichuan said softly to Ji Lei, "Your Excellency Ji, what a truly wonderful sight." A chuckle rose from under the umbrella. He leisurely turned the umbrella and looked at Xiao Qia's back. Grand Mentor Qi and Ji Gang were drinking wine and tea under the eaves. Ji Gang drank his tea and said, "Was killing Xiaofuzi a ploy to let Chuaner out?" Grand Mentor Qi took small sips of the wine as though he could not bear to drink it. He hugged the gourd and said, "Who knows? Make a guess yourself." Ji Gang turned around and said, "No matter what, his safety is the most important." Grand Mentor Qi shook the gourd and said, "It is only by making a risky move that a soldier can take his foe by surprise. You taught him martial arts so that he could stay calm in hours of peril. Sometimes we have to put safety aside. It is only when you leave no room for maneuver or escape that one will put up a desperate fight for survival and emerge victorious." Ji Gang watched the rain intensify with a worried frown and said, "I have already made proper arrangement for the task you entrusted me with. This is called casting a long line." 9 Grand Mentor Qi scratched his foot. "If you don't let it brave the water for a few years before you haul in the net, then all you will catch are lousy fishes and prawns. 10 Should there come a day you and I both lose our lives in the midst of this, the arrangement today will be the killer move that will preserve his life." Chapter 17, Storm. Chapter 17. Storm. It was in the middle of the night that the Empress Dowager draped her clothes over herself and asked through the bed canopy, "What's that din about?" Hua Xiangyi nudged the canopy aside and helped the Empress Dowager out of the incense-scented and warmed bedding. She replied in a soft voice, "The students of the Imperial College want the Emperor to retract his appointment edict." The Empress Dowager got up, and the maidservants on both sides quietly lit the lamps and raised the curtains. Hua Xiangyi helped the Empress Dowager to the Arhat bed with a girdled waist, horse's hooves legs, and plain boards at the sides. A soft cushion and heater were presented together to the Empress Dowager, while fermented milk too was warmed up for her. The Empress Dowager stirred the spoon with a light frown on her face. How did that happen out of the blue? She pondered it over for a moment. The appointment order was only given yesterday, and they came to stir up a ruckus tonight. Isn't that way too fast? What's more, the ones creating a commotion are those from the Imperial College. Hua Xiangyi went along with the Empress Dowager and said, Auntie, all the literary talents in the world look to the Imperial College. Even the Secretariat Elder himself would find it ill-advised to step in. The Empress Dowager scooped up the fermented milk. Although her makeup-less face showed signs of aging, it added character to her looks. She gradually put aside the bowl and leaned back against the cushion to stare at the glazed lampshade. After a short while she said, That's right. Shun Wei is now notorious for his crime. By all sentiment and logic, the Secretariat Elder cannot come forward to rebuke the students. If the students force His Majesty to rescind his order, then I'll have to swallow this bitter pill in silence this time. Auntie, Hua Xiangyi said, it wasn't His Majesty's original intent to release Shen Zichuan. Now that he has earned himself the infamy of being muddle-headed for no reason because of this order, I'm afraid it will create a distance between you both. It doesn't matter, the Empress Dowager said. Once Imperial concubine Wei is with child Dazhou will have an heir. The imperial heir is the foundation of the empire. As long as I have the heir in my hands, I'm still the Empress Dowager of Dazhou. His emperor has long been at odds with me ever since he fell ill. Even if he flies into a rage this time, it's merely a tantrum thrown during a moment of illness. Let him vent. After his illness, Emperor Xiande gradually stopped going along with the Empress Dowager's will. Although these were all trivial daily matters, it was already an indication of his dissension. The Empress Dowager had assumed command in the palace with Pan Rugi at her side and Secretariat Elder Hua in the imperial court. If she wanted to ensure the continuation of the burgeoning power and authority of the Hua clan, then she needed a submissive and obedient emperor. If Emperor Xiande could no longer fit the role, then all she had to do was to replace him. The sole reason the Empress Dowager did not like Prince Chu, Li Jianheng, was because he had already come of age. For he was not a weak child, nor was he a child who had grown up under her. How could such a person, if he were to ascend to the throne, be as obedient as an imperial grandson raised by her? What's more, the appeal today is a blow to His Majesty's dignity. The Empress Dowager said calmly, the 9 years His Majesty has been on the throne, his food and clothing, as well as all other matters, whether important or trivial, have to go through me. But now, he wants to be an independent and imperious emperor. For this, he emboldened himself to show goodwill to the Shao clan. Not only did he refuse to release Shen Zichuan, he even wanted to protect the Prince Chu. But I understand him. He is outwardly strong and inwardly weak. He fears me. That's why he always aimed to be on both parties' good sides. Instead, he appears to be of two minds, and ends up thoroughly offending both parties. Didn't His Majesty imprison Shen Zichuan for so many years for the sake of the Shao clan? What does imprisonment mean? The Empress Dowager took Hua Xiangyi's hand and said soberly, imprisonment is a reprieve from death. His Majesty thought he did a favor to the Shao clan, but he's really just sowing the seed of disaster. Shao Jiming lost his younger brother. What Li Bei wants is for Shen Zichuan to die. As long as Shen Zichuan remains alive, His Majesty will let down all those 120,000 armored cavalry who came to his rescue. Think about it. Shao Jiming worked himself to the bone all to prove that he harbors no thoughts of disloyalty. He even dares to leave his younger brother behind in Kudu. He has conducted himself with frankness and sincerity towards His Majesty. Yet, in order not to offend me, His Majesty turned around and dismissed Shen Zichuan's death penalty and locked him up instead. If Shen Zichuan doesn't die, he will become the root of trouble. This is the period of the struggle between life and death, and yet His Majesty is still so naive. And need I mention the incident this time? To protect Prince Chu, His Majesty was not willing to launch a full investigation into Xiaofuzi's case and consequently cut off Pan Rugi's subsequent move. At the same time, he's afraid I'd harbor ill feelings against him, so he reluctantly let Shen Zichuan off. He thought the Shao clan would understand his difficulties, but Shao Jiming is far away in Libei. Once he learns about this matter, he will not be happy. If that's the case, Hua Xiangyi said, could it have been someone from the Shao clan who incited the Imperial College students to stir up trouble? Forcing His Majesty to rescind his edict this time would not only drive a wedge between His Majesty and the Hua clan, it would also prevent the Secretariat Elder and Auntie from stepping forward. At the same time, it can also eliminate Shen Zichuan through the hands of another. If it's so clear-cut. The Empress Dowager brushed aside Hua Xiangyi's stray hair and said dotingly, then what's the need for Shao Jiming to be one of the 4 generals of the world? That lad has always been prudent in his conduct. If he were the perpetrator, he would not be found out this easily. Besides, Libei has no dealings with the Imperial College. I can't guess. Hua Xiangyi leaned against the Empress Dowager and said like a pampered child, tell me, Auntie. All right. The Empress Dowager was childless this life, and she was not close to those on her maternal grandparents' side. The only one she doted on was Hua Xiangyi. She said, Auntie will teach you. Look at the surrounding 8 cities established beyond Kudu. The 8 cities are where the current 8 great clans 5 originated. Our Hua clan resides in the city of Diqing at the south of the capital. It has always been the city of choice for imperial concubines. But it's only during my time that the Hua clan was considered to be at the height of its glory and came out tops among the 8 great clans. A few years earlier, when the former emperor had only just ascended to the throne, it was the Yao clan who was the most favored and honored. This was because the Yao clan had been conferred as the emperor's tutor thrice. If it weren't for old Master Yao's lack of literary talents during his time, that Qi Huilian from Yuzhou might not even get to be the grand mentor of Yongyi. 6 Moreover, of the current Shi clan, only Shi Guan has been promoted to the post of commander-in-chief of the 8 great training divisions to manage the younger generations of the 8 great clans. Just think of him as a teacher of the military camp. The Shi clan has always been men of inferior morals and virtues. They will not achieve great things. Meanwhile, the Shui clan has already begun its decline after the glorious death of Grand Master Shui. Shui Xiuzhua is the only one now who has an official post in the central administration. As for the remaining Wei, Pan, Fei, and Han clans, I'll tell you about them next time. I've heard Father mention these before. Hua Xiangyi said. So Auntie is telling me these to suggest that the secret instigator of the Imperial College this time might be someone else from the 8 great clans. That's what I suspect. The Empress Dowager said. Glory is enjoyed in turn. It has been many years since the Hua clan has enjoyed its rise following my ascent. It's possible for someone to harbor some other intent on seeing how gravely ill His Majesty is now. Summon Pan Rugi over tomorrow morning, and let him have the Imperial bodyguards conduct a thorough investigation in secret. Kudu is such a big place. I don't believe there is not a single loose lip within. Shao Qia wrung away the water on his clothes and entered Mingli Hall together with Ji Lei. It was already late at night, and Emperor Xiando was still awake. You have been grounded to self-reflect on the errors of your ways. Emperor Xianda held a memorial 7 as he glanced at Shao Qiyi and asked in a hoarse voice, So why are you running around with the imperial bodyguards? Shao Qia was really wronged. He said, the commander-in-chief was the one who asked this humble subject to go. This humble subject thought that it was your Majesty's verbal orders. After you went, Emperor Xianda asked, how did it go? Ji Lei immediately kowtowed and said, to reply to your Majesty, the students of the Imperial College acted upon someone else's instigation and not only spoke presumptuously on state affairs and slandered your Majesty, but also lay their hands on Pangongong. The scene was a chaotic mess. This humble subject wanted to take them into custody, but Viceroy Shao was unwilling to. And he wasn't just unwilling. That imperial army was simply cast in the same mold as Shao Qie. They had acted shamelessly to obstruct the imperial bodyguards to prevent them from rounding up the students. All that was left of them was to lie on the floor and roll around. This bunch of idle military ruffians sure had skins as thick as the city wall. Emperor Xiande asked Shao Qie, "You obstructed the imperial bodyguards from arresting the students?" Shao Qie said, "They are just a group of students. If they are really taken to the imperial prison, most of them might not survive. We can disregard their lives, but what are we to do if it damages your Majesty's virtuous name?" They banded together for selfish purposes and colluded with malicious people. They clearly intended to throw the imperial court into chaos. If we do not take these kinds of people to trial, then what's the use of the imperial bodyguards in the future? Ji Lei said indignantly. Emperor Xiande coughed for a long time before he said, "Suen has done well." "Your Majesty!" Ji Lei could not believe it. This group of students rallied to stir up trouble. They even dared to shout the word rebellion. If we do not deal with them severely, it will endanger the empire and state. "I'll be frank," Emperor Xiande said in a lukewarm tone. "If they hadn't been forced to this pivotal moment, why would they come to blows with the imperial bodyguards and yell such words instead of attending classes? That remaining descendant of the Shun clan should have never been released. If it weren't for... Emperor Xiande cast aside the memorial and started to cough. He was back to normal after his coughing eased up a little. "No matter what, they have to be punished. Reduce the Imperial College's fund for provisions by half and change their meals from twice a day to once. Impose the punishment on them for half a year." Knowing that Emperor Xiande had already made up his mind, Ji Lei said nothing more. He kneeled in silence, but Emperor Xiande knew what he was thinking. "The imperial bodyguards are dogs of mine." Emperor Xiande stared at Ji Lei. "As the commander-in-chief of the imperial bodyguards, why are you going around acknowledging others as your godfather, god-grandfather? I have never brought this up on account that you were still considered deferential. Tonight, I want you to appease the students of the Imperial College. Do you understand?" Ji Lei kowtowed and said, "This humble servant obeys. The imperial bodyguards serve only your Majesty." By the time they came out, the rain had already lightened. A little eunuch from the bailiff office came to hold up umbrellas for both of them. Ji Lei did not look good as he raised his hand at Shao Qie and made to leave. But Shao Qie was unconcerned as he said, "Old Ji, I had no choice too. I was grounded yesterday. Even if I wanted to come out and play, I wouldn't dare to lay a hand on the students without careful consideration." Looking at how much of a jerk Shao Qie was made Ji Lei furious, but there was nowhere for him to vent, so he merely nodded his head at random, hoping that Shao Qie would leave. "But what do you think of my imperial army?" Shao Qie took the umbrella from the little eunuch's hand and dismissed him. He continued to head out of the palace with Ji Lei. Ji Lei thought, what else? Aren't they all nothing more than a bunch of scoundrels? They are even worse off now that they are following you. But he said politely, they seem to be much more spirited than before. "Right," Shao Qie said shamelessly. "I think the Imperial Army's drill ground is too small to be put to good use. Can you ask the Commander-in-Chief on my behalf if he could allocate a place for the Imperial Army?" Ji Lei had heard a long time ago that Shao Qie had led the Imperial Army to play polo at the drill ground. He never expected the latter to have the guts to ask for more land. But it wasn't good for him to turn the latter down right in the face, so he said, "I'm afraid that would be tough. Prince Chu expanded his residence last month, and his forcible seizure of civilians' residences had even been reported to the prefectural yamen. There are people everywhere in Kudu now, so where is Guan going to find the place for you to use as a military drill ground? Besides, even if there's a spot in the city, it has to be granted to the 8 training divisions." "Oh," Shao Qie said under the umbrella. Even if it isn't the turn of our imperial army to get a piece of land within the city, we can also make do with land outside of it, as long as the place is big enough to let us play to our heart's content. It was then Ji Lei grasped the intent of his word. He looked at Xiao Qie and laughed. He said, "All right, second young master. You've long taken a fancy to a piece of land, haven't you? So why still play dumb with me? I'm already here to ask you for a favor, am I not, old Ji?" Xiao Qie said, "You're the one people give face to the most in Kudu. How would the commander-in-chief turn you down if you put in a request to him? We can negotiate if it's a done deal. There's no need to talk about money with me." Ji Lei finally softened his attitude. "I've acknowledged a godson, and I was just wondering where to find a good horse for him. When it comes to horses, there's no one who is more knowledgeable than the second young master, is there? I'll send him a few horses to play with." Xiao Qie said, "The horses bred from the Hongyan Mountains are no worse than mine. In a few days, I'll send someone to deliver them directly to your residence." "I'll speak to Guan," Ji Lei said. "How big can the matter of a drill ground be? Just wait for my news." The rain had stopped by the time both men parted ways. Xiao Qie got into the horse carriage. Chen Yang looked at Ji Lei's sedan and said, "Is the viceroy really going to give the residence's horses to him? What a pity! There's no free lunch." Xiao Qie kicked off his boots. His feet had long been soaked. "We need to have a drill ground. It's too conspicuous in the capital. If that old crook can't deliver after accepting the horses," he said coldly, "then I'll send his son to meet his ancestors." The carriage began to sway. Xiao Qie wiped his face with a handkerchief and asked, "Where is that man?" Chen Yang repeated, That man? Shen Zichuan. He went back a long time ago." Chen Yang poured tea for Xiao Qie and said, "His steps seem weak and unstable to me. With that kind of health, how is he going to take up a post in the imperial bodyguards? Rearing elephants." Xiao Qie took the tea and gulped it all down. "Invalids are only too anxious to dodge manual labor. He's most definitely the kind of person who will want to loaf on the job." The man who wanted to loaf on the job sneezed. He sat in the dimness for a short while, wondering if he had caught a cold. Suddenly, the door was pushed open, and a rotund figure strode in. Shi Hongxian marveled in wonder the moment he entered. "This place sure is fine. Even the imperial bodyguards won't be able to figure it out." Without turning his head back, Shen Zichuan said, "Just a dilapidated house with a courtyard that no one wants to rent. That's the only good thing about it. But this compound isn't easy to get your hands on." Shi Hongxian rubbed his hands and sat down. He looked at Shen Zichuan. This was the old courtyard that the former emperor bestowed to the crown prince, who then awarded it to Qi Huilian. It was later sold away after Qi Huilian's death. "How did you get your hands on it?" Shen Zichuan sipped his tea as he exchanged a meaningful look with Shi Hongxian for a moment. Shi Hongxian raised his hand unhurriedly and said, "Look at this cheap mouth of mine, always trying to pry into others' backgrounds. I heard on the way here earlier that Pan Rugi was hit too. This move of yours is truly delightful." "Eldest Master Shi is the commander-in-chief of the 8 training divisions," Shen Zichuan said. "After this incident, he will rouse the Empress Dowager's suspicions. His life in the days ahead will not be easy. I'll feel good if Shi Guan has a hard time." Shi Hongxian placed his fleshy palms on the table and said, "Instead of waiting for the major figures in the imperial court to say a word, we might as well get the students to do so first as a preemptive move. After this incident you could be said to be truly released." Shen Zichuan took the chopsticks and picked up some vegetarian food, just a small trick. "I've made a mockery out of myself before the second young master." Shi Hongxian watched Shen Zichuan eat before he touched his own chopstick. He said, "What are you going to do in the future?" "Just trying to get by in the imperial bodyguards." Shen Zichuan said, "Ji Lei is Pan Rugi's godson and Shi Guan's sworn brother. You want to kill Shi Guan, But how are you going to get past Ji Lei? Why not you and I split their lives each among us and let them be good buddies for life? Shi Hongxian sniggered for a moment. He leaned over the table and asked Shen Zichuan sinisterly, "What's your grudge with Ji Lei?" Shen Zichuan picked away the Sichuan peppers. Without even lifting his eyelids, he said, "I don't like those shoes he's wearing." Chapter 18. Donkey Roast. Chapter 18. Donkey Roast. Xiao Qie had a quiet time for half a month before he finally received a reply from Ji Lei informing him that the matter of the military drill ground was a done deal. He immediately headed out of the city with Chen Yang to take a look at the place. It was a piece of wasteland that was originally a mass burial site. The platform used for execution by decapitation was later shifted away to another place, and so this place became empty. Although Mount Feng stands between it and the city, Chen Yang dismounted the horse, sized up the area, and continued, "It's still too far. We just have to run for 3 hours before dawn to reach it." Xiao Qie pointed his horsewhip at one end. "We have to treat those wily old men from the Ministry of Works to a good meal to cobble together some materials so that we can fill up this side. Tidy it up a little and make do with it. This place is so remote that even the patrols of the 8 great training divisions will not make it here. Viceroy, for us to spend money on them," Chen Yang said, "I can't even say how uncomfortable that makes me." "Hold it in even if you are uncomfortable," Xiao Qie said. "Even if they squat on our heads to pee on us, we still have to fix up this place." "Okay." Chen Yang did not dare to say a word more. Xiao Qie stayed until it was evening before he rode his horse back. The moment he entered the city, he saw Li Jianheng's guard waiting for him at the entrance. "What's the matter?" Xiao Qie reined in his horse and asked. The guard paid his obeisances and said, "His Highness has organized a feast at Huixiong Tavern on Donglong Street. He's waiting for Your Excellency to go over for a meal." Xiao Qie thought for a moment, then spurred his horse over. The main street of Donglong faced Kaling River. Lanterns blazed the moment night fell. Wine taverns and pleasure houses flanked both sides of the street, while all kinds of gaily painted pleasure boats and small, light boats parked on the river. Xiao Qie dismounted his horse at Huixiong Tavern. The shopkeeper followed at his beck and call and personally led him upstairs. It was only when he raised the curtain for a look that he realized this feast was not simple. Everyone present at the feast was either well-known or young masters whose fathers or elder brothers were working as governmental officials. Next to Prince Chu was a fair-faced little eunuch who looked delicate and pretty. This should be the grandson Pan Rugi had found for himself again after Xiaofuzi's death. "Suan is here," Li Jianheng called out to him. "Come and take a seat. We're waiting for you." Xiao Qie picked a vacant seat at random to sit. He said with a smile, "What a large turnout. Let me introduce. This is Pan Gonggong's grandson, Feng Quan." "Feng Gonggong," Li Jianheng said to Feng Quan, "this is my good buddy, the second young master of the Libei's Xiao clan, and the viceroy of the imperial army, Xiao Suan." Feng Quan was more pleasing to the eye than Xiaofuzi had been. He bowed respectfully to Xiao Qie and said, "I've heard a lot about the viceroy." Shi Hongxian sat opposite them with one leg crossed over the other. He took up 2 seats and was so warm that his plump face was perspiring profusely. He said, "Let's dispense with the formalities. Your Highness, which other guest has yet to arrive today? If everyone is here, let's start the feast." Li Jianheng raised his eyebrows at Xiao Qie and said, "I have also invited a distinguished guest whom everyone wants to meet." Xiao Qie was baffled by his unexpected gesture. Just then, he heard the waiter behind him lift the curtain and announce, "The distinguished guest has arrived." Everyone at the feast fell silent. Xiao Qie looked back just in time to see Shen Zichuan, dressed in his imperial bodyguard's robe, striding in. Shen Zichuan was visibly stupefied on seeing him. However, his expression was so obvious that Xiao Qie did not believe it at all. everyone present knew that there was discord between them. For a moment the atmosphere was strange. Those waiting to watch the drama exchanged meaningful glances at one another. Li Jianheng said warmly, "This is Shen Lanzhao. Everyone knows who he is, right? Lanzhao, take a seat. Shopkeeper, start the feast." Xiao Qia felt that Li Jianheng must have been possessed to invite Shen Zichuan over just because of that face of his. Of all places to sit, Shen Zichuan just had to pick the seat beside Xiao Qia. Both men looked at each other as he sat down. So, this is Shen Lanzhao, whose name has been making waves in Kudu lately. Shi Hongxian looked askance at Shen Zichuan. Seeing is truly believing. I heard that Lanzhao's, Li Jianheng said, mother was an unparalleled beauty in Duanzhou back then. Shen Wei had to stake half of his princely residence before he won her heart. So how could Lanzhao not be born pretty? A scattering of laughter rose in the room. Everyone openly and surreptitiously glanced at Shen Zichuan's face. Even Feng Quan made noises of appreciation and lamented, if this master had been born a female, then what will the lady of the Hua clan be good for? The group of rich young masters tacitly burst into laughter. Out of the corner of his eye, Xiao Qia saw Shen Zichuan with his head partially lowered. He could not read the latter's emotions. The nape of this man's neck was shrouded under the dim light of the glazed lamp beside him. It extended under his collar like white jade, looking as if one could taste ecstasy by kneading it. It waited defenselessly for someone to make a move. The contours of his side profile were smooth and beautiful, and the arch of the bridge of his nose was gorgeous. The corners of his eyes were the most devastating. Everything that could make one's heart itch all lay within them. A faint hint of a smile followed as those corners curved upward. Xiao Qia took another look. Shen Zichuan was indeed smiling. "Have you mistaken me for someone else?" Shen Zichuan tilted his eyes towards Xiao Qia. "Just looking at you in a different light." Xiao Qia retracted his gaze. Shen Zichuan raised his eyes and smiled subserviently at the various gentlemen present at the feast. He said, "I'm just of average looks. Everyone has been too kind to me." On hearing his words, those who were still carrying themselves with decorum loosened up. The more they spoke, the more vulgar their words. Shi Hongxian said, "Wasn't there a new trick that had come into vogue recently on Donglong Street? It's called playing with cups. Fill up a golden cup with top-grade wine and place it in the fragrant shoe of a beauty and pass it around to drink for fun. Your Highness, have you played it before?" Li Jianheng laughed and said, "I have the wine, but I can't find a beauty." Shi Hongxian motioned flippantly, "Isn't one sitting right here?" All along, Shen Zichuan looked as if he was not acquainted with him. He forced a smile and said, "I'm not worthy of the beauty label. If everyone really wants to have fun, then I'll invite everyone to the brothel tonight to play to your heart's content." When all is said and done, Shen Zichuan still had the Hua clan to back him. On seeing this, the others did not dare to push it. Only Shi Hongxian seemed as if his 8 characters too conflicted with Shen Zichuan's. The more ruckus he created, the uglier the situation became. There had been news lately that Shi Guan had lost favor with the Empress Dowager, so all of them simply thought that Shi Hongxian was venting his anger on Shen Zichuan for his elder brother. Shen Zichuan was about to speak when he suddenly heard Xiao Qia say beside him, "How can you ask His Highness Prince Chu to play what others have played before? This drinking from shoes and playing with cups is such an old game from centuries ago. Even the prostitutes in the south aren't interested in it. How about we try a different way of playing? Second young Master Shi, take off your shoes, and we can use them as boats to fool around with." Those at the feast roared with laughter. Shi Hongxian was obese, and his feet were much bigger than the average man. No one usually dared to bring it up, so they did not expect Xiao Qia to poke fun at it. "That works too." Shi Hongxian rolled with it and graciously raised his legs. He ordered, "Men, remove my shoes." Li Jianheng started to have fun and cussed a few words. Shen Zichuan did not expect Xiao Qia to help him out of a fix either. He and Shi Hongxian had been putting on a show. He looked at Xiao Qie again. Xiao Qie ignored him and picked up his chopsticks to grab some food to eat. The little eunuch, Feng Quan, sat for a moment. When he saw that the dishes were more or less served, he said, "Having fun is a matter for you gentlemen here. So let me add another dish for everyone tonight." As he spoke, he clapped his hands. The waiters downstairs, who were already prepared a long time ago, hurriedly entered to serve the dish. However, this dish was a small donkey that was still alive. Feng Quan said, "Of all the delicacies in the world, donkey meat is the best. Gentlemen, have you ever tried donkey roast?" The noise in the room died down. Everyone looked at the donkey in the center. Li Jianheng asked, "What's donkey roast?" The waiters dumped some soil on the ground and deftly made a small circular plot of land out of the soil. They chased the donkey onto the soil and buried its 4 hooves in it so that the donkey's belly was touching the soil. Then, they covered the donkey with a thick padded quilt. "Gentlemen," Feng Quan said amicably, "watch." A waiter half-crouched as he took the ladle and scooped out the boiling soup that came fresh out of the pot and poured it all over. Those assisting beside him held down the quilt and wiped it down over the head of the braying donkey to scald off its fur while it was still alive. But they were still not done. The waiter who had poured the boiling soup set aside the ladle and gouged the meat out of this seared donkey's body. The meat was placed in the dish, and the man by the side of the stove roasted it on the spot. After he was done, he passed the plate one at a time to everyone present. The braying of the donkey grew even more tragic. Even the people downstairs were alarmed. The color drained from Li Jianheng's face. He looked at this donkey meat and covered his nose and mouth to say, "Feng Gonggong, isn't this dish a little too, Your Highness, why don't you try it first? This donkey meat is the most delicious when it is gouged out right after boiling soup has been poured over it. Food must be eaten fresh." Feng Quan pointed out, "There's a meaning to this donkey roast. Let's take a certain person as an example. If said person were to fall into the hands of others, then he must put himself at the mercy of others. If the master tells him to kneel, he must kneel. If the master wants him to cry, he must cry. And if the master is eyeing his flesh, he must let others gouge him like this." Shen Zichuan's situation was like this donkey. He looked at the blood-stained quilt. The blood trickled into the soil until the stench of it permeated the air. It was as if he was looking at Ji Mu and himself 5 years ago. Excellent taste. Shi Hongxian ate a few slices. He seemed like he did not grasp the meaning behind, and was only concerned about proclaiming how much of a thrill it was. All this time, Shen Zichuan's chopsticks did not move, while Xiao Qie's chopsticks never touched the meat. Li Jianheng felt something odd about those words when he heard it. He said apprehensively, "It's really too depraved. Take it away." "Hold on." Feng Quan finally looked at Shen Zichuan. "Young Master Shen, my godfather was the one who specifically asked me to serve this dish. Why aren't you eating it?" Pan Rugi was his godgrandfather, so by extension, Ji Lei could really be considered his godfather. Exactly what connection or backing did this lad have for him to get Pan Rugi's favor and trust this quickly? Not only did he take over Xiaofuzi's duties, he even got into Ji Lei's good graces. Ji Lei could not kill Shen Zichuan, and now that Shen Zichuan had come under his command, he could not touch him either. Coming up with such a low-down way to humiliate Shen Zichuan tonight was to make it clear that the grudge between them was not over. Shen Zichuan picked up the chopstick. Before Shen Zichuan could finish his words, the chair beside him was suddenly pushed aside as Xiao Qie rose to his feet. He picked up the plate containing the donkey meat and flung it in Feng Quan's direction. It crashed to the ground with a clatter. Li Jianheng hurriedly stood up and said, Suan." Xiao Qie stared at Feng Quan. Whoever Feng Quan wanted to humiliate on Ji Lei's behalf was not something he could interfere with. But he, Xiao Qie, was also a caged beast right this hour and day. He was no different from this donkey. This was a slap in his face too. And it hurt. Feng Quan looked at him in puzzlement and asked, "Is it not to the viceroy's liking?" Xiao Qie pressed his thumb down on the hilt of Longli blade 3 at the side of his waist. Screams rose in the entire room as he drew his blade. His hand rose, and the blade fell to decapitate the donkey, killing it. Its miserable braying ceased. Blood seeped out of the soil onto the ground, turning the floor vividly red. The others all held their breath, not knowing what Xiao Qie would do. With his back to the dim light, Xiao Qie wiped the edge of his blade clean with the tablecloth. Only then did he casually turn around and smiled at all those present. "Gentlemen, please continue." Li Jianheng stared at his blade and said softly, Suen, keep it away." Xiao Qie kept the blade back into its sheath, and threw a look at Feng Quan. He raised his foot to lift a chair over and sat unreservedly in the middle. He said, "Roast it all together. I'll be here tonight to watch Feng Gonggong eat." In the end, Feng Quan called for his sedan chair and left in a hurry. Li Jianheng drank some wine and wept as he said to Xiao Qie, "Suen, I really didn't think of this. Who would know that castrated crook to be so despicable? We are buddies. You mustn't let this matter hurt our friendship." Xiao Qie tugged at the corners of his mouth and said, "There's a distinction between those close to you and those distant from you. I understand. You go on ahead first." Li Jianheng tugged at his sleeves, wanting to say more. Xiao Qie simply got Chen Yang to stuff Li Jianheng into the sedan. "Send Prince Chu back." Xiao Qie said, "I'll walk back myself." In no way would Chen Yang ramble on when he saw the unhappiness in Xiao Qie's expression, so he got on his horse and left with Prince Chu's sedan. Xiao Qie alone stood under a lantern. After a moment, he kicked over somebody else's potted plant. The potted plant, which was worth a lot of money, tumbled on the ground and hit the bottom of the stairs. A hand gently held it up. Shun Zichuan stood on the stairs and said unperturbedly, "Are you that rich? You'll have to compensate for this, you know." Xiao Qie replied coldly, "I have lots of money." With that, he felt around his waist. But it was empty. Shun Zichuan waited for a while, then turned to the shopkeeper and said, "Put it on this master's tab. He has lots of money." Chapter 19, Truth versus Lies. Chapter 19, Truth versus Lies. The breeze caressed past the hot summer night, whilst the moon hung over the lush treetop. Xiao Qie was in tip-top form, so the rush of wine promptly made him hot. At the moment, he was irritable. He stared at Shun Zichuan as the latter made his way down. He said, "So Zhaozi Temple can still teach one to purify one's heart of desires and change one's temper." Shun Zichuan dismissed the waiter and said, "I'm the best at grinning and bearing it." Xiao Qie accepted the waiter's tea to rinse his mouth. Then he wiped his mouth and said, "At least do a decent job if you want to make it up. You probably don't even know how to spell those last 4 words. We are all just playing along for fun." Shun Zichuan wiped his hands and smiled at him. "Yet, you took it seriously." Xiao Qie did not look at him. He simply threw the handkerchief onto the tray and said, "The show is over. Who would believe that? Someone has to play that particular role, no? Xiao Suen was just perfect for it. Didn't you feel good watching it too? That blade is a treasure." Shun Zichuan's eyes wandered down. Xiao Qie raised his hand to block his view and said, "And the person isn't?" One of the lanterns upstairs went out. Shun Zichuan sighed and said, "How do you expect me to reply to that? That's rather inappropriate." "You have a good eye." Xiao Qie moved his hand away and stared at him ruthlessly and fiercely. Few people can recognize a good blade. The man himself is precious. One Shun Zichuan went along with his words, so naturally, everything he wears is quality stuff. Even a blind cat can stumble upon a dead mouse. 2 I was merely guessing. "Why is it that when you praise me," Xiao Qie said, "I feel as if I've seen a ghost? You hardly get praised, huh?" Shun Zichuan comforted him and said, "I haven't even voiced my most sincere ones yet." The surrounding people had all dispersed. Xiao Qie said in a lukewarm tone, you sure can endure. Grand plans are ruined by a lack of forbearance. There's more of my capability to come. Shen Zichuan smiled. Don't be so anxious. Grand plans. Xiao Qia said. Kudu is only this big. What else is there for you to strive this hard for? I was just saying. Shen Zichuan paused and looked affectionately at Xiao Qia. And you really believed it? Second young master, I really couldn't tell that you are the kind who are naive and artless. I'm just a frivolous young master who's just loafing around drinking and dining and waiting to die. Xiao Qia said. How would I know how treacherous the world is? There's even someone like you to coax me. My bad. Shen Zichuan moved a step. I saw how pitiful you were with your talons and fangs sealed off. Slaying with your blade tonight must have been pretty gratifying for you. A little. Xiao Qia lifted his leg to block Shen Zichuan's way and said, Where are you going? We aren't done talking yet. Sending you back to your residence. Shen Zichuan said, You helped me out a tight spot tonight. I'm so grateful I'm shedding tears. There is no way I can ever repay you for this kindness. Xiao Qia smiled and said, You are so full of lies. You must have deceived quite a number of people, huh? There aren't many who have been taken in. Shen Zichuan looked back. A man always has to tell a few lies, like I've lots of money, that kind. Xiao Qia withdrew his leg and said, I'm nothing compared to you. See. Shen Zichuan said gently, You're being polite again. There was simply no way to chat with this man. Because there was no way he could tell which of his words were the truth and which were the lies. Every sentence was like the superficial surface of muddied water. Even if he circled around it, he could still not pry anything out of it. Xiao Qia turned around and whistled for his horse. He said, It was because of the incident tonight that you speak on such close terms to me. Everyone is gone now. It's meaningless to keep on pretending. Then what can I do? Shen Zichuan picked up the lantern and looked at him gently and obediently. Give you another bite? Xiao Qia swiftly took a step closer and said with ease, You use this mortal flesh of yours to bewitch others. What do you want me to think by looking at me like that? Unperturbed, Shen Zichuan said to him in a soft voice, I was born with such a pair of expressive eyes. Xiao Qia used his whip to point between Shen Zichuan's eyebrows without touching it. He said derisively, What a waste of those eyes. All they contain within are machinations. I was born to be lowly. Shen Zichuan lifted his finger and slowly pushed aside his whip. He said, If I don't machinate, then how am I going to have my fun? I did what I did tonight for myself. Xiao Qia said mercilessly, Don't you go around thinking it was because I'm interested in you. The moon is so beautiful tonight. Shen Zichuan said, Why do you have to spoil the mood and stop me from thinking so? Xiao Qia flipped onto the horse and looked at him for a moment as he held the reins. He said frivolously, I fear that you will latch on to me because of this bit of kindness and get on my nerves with all those weeping and wailing. Did you have too much to drink? Shen Zichuan insinuated. You are beyond cure. Who knows about that? Xiao Qia said. It's not like you have never made such an unreasonable scene before. The night quietened down. Xiao Qia withdrew his eyes. This could be said to be a small victory. He spurred his horse on a few steps when he suddenly heard the man behind him say with a smile, Have you found what you lost 5 years ago? Xiao Qia abruptly looked back and instantly reined in his horse. He demanded in a frosty voice, Return me the thumb ring. Shen Zichuan looked at him, but Xiao Qia found the expression in his eyes wicked. Shen Zichuan said, Want the thumb ring? Easy. Bark twice like a dog and I'll give it back to you. The gerfalcon swooped down and landed on Xiao Qia's shoulder. Together with its master, it stared frostily at Shen Zichuan. It was in the dead of night. An unnamed watchman 3 struck his clapper 4 and startled the lantern in Shen Zichuan's hand into extinguishing. The road went dark. It was several days later before Li Jianheng dared to show his face before Xiao Qia. He was surprised to find that Xiao Qia's anger had yet to subside. Ice fragments kept scattering all around them while they were listening to the music, scaring those delicate, smooth-skinned ladies so much that not one of them dared to come over to wait upon them. Li Jianheng held the teacup in his hands to shield himself and whispered, "Are you still angry?" Xiao Qia chomped the ice to pieces and said, "Nope." Li Jianheng's hair stood on end as he heard those crunch sounds. He said, "Autumn is right around the corner, so don't eat ice like that. It's rather terrifying. Such a big cellar of ice is prepared every year. It'd be a waste to leave it there." Xiao Qia propped up both his legs and leaned back. "Then, I'll tell you something happy." Li Jianheng could not help but shift his butt over. He said, "That Feng Quan. You know who he is?" "Who?" "Remember that little lady I told you about?" Li Jianheng beamed and said with shifty eyes, "Feng Quan is her younger brother. She has now won the favor of Pan Rugi, so how could Pan Rugi not promote Feng Quan? This Feng Quan is such a glib talker. He even coaxed Ji Lei until Ji Lei was over the moon and wanted to take him as his son. From the looks of it." Xiao Qia propped up his head with one arm and glanced at Li Jianheng. "You really have your heart set on that little lady." "Of course," Li Jianheng said. "So, the incident that day was all done by that bastard Ji Lei. As his son, how would Feng Quan dare to defy his father's order?" "So, you are saying you want me to let him off?" Xiao Qia asked. Li Jianheng was a flexible man who did not have the aspirations expected of the descendants of the imperial clan. He hurriedly slipped down from his chair and squatted before Xiao Qia to implore him. "Buddy, please let him off this once for the sake of my romance. Besides, didn't we make him eat until he puked? He's Pan Rugi's man, after all. It isn't good not to give him face. It has only been a few days since Xiaofuzi's incident. His Majesty is still watching us." Xiao Qia suddenly stared at him. He sat up and asked, "Did you touch her?" Li Jianheng hummed. Xiao Qia said, "You touch Pan Rugi's woman right under his nose? If he were a real man, I wouldn't do it." Li Jianheng reluctantly stood up and said, "He's just an old eunuch with just that bit of trick to liven things up. He beat up a delicate and ravishing beauty all day long until she wept. This beauty was originally mine. If you were in my shoes, would you do it or not?" 5. Exasperated at Li Jianheng's failure to live up to expectations, Xiao Qia said, "No." Li Jianheng pleaded again, "Suen, we are buddies. How big an issue can it be? Just turn a blind eye. If you let Feng Quan off, I'll give you something else to play with." Xiao Qia lay back again and said nothing. If Pan Rugi found out about this incident, then Xiaofuzi's episode would be nothing in comparison. That old dog would definitely think of ways to kill them both. His promotion of Feng Quan alone was sufficient for anyone to get a glimpse of how much he doted on that woman. Pan Rugi was already 65 years of age. He had no biological son, and none of the pretty women around him these years could remain by his side for so long. If he truly regarded this woman as his wife or concubine, then he might even dare to hack Li Jianheng to death. Xiao Qia listened to Li Jianheng's incessant chatter and said, "Since you dared to do this, does it mean you already have a plan thought out?" Li Jianheng sat on the carpet and lowered his head to study his mozo bamboo fan. He said in a small voice, "Not really. It's just that I've heard that Pan Rugi had once kept a toy boy. All I have to do is to just have to send him one to play with, no?" Xiao Qia said, "There aren't many who could surpass that beauty of yours, are there?" Li Jianheng was on tenterhooks and did not dare to hide it from him. He said, "Lately, quite a number of people have been asking around about that." Shun Lanzhao. "Asking about what?" "Asking about his price and whether they could afford to raise him." Seeing Xiao Qia's expressionless face, Li Jianheng hurriedly grabbed the chair and said, "Money is not an issue. But I don't dare to look for him. If he were to take desperate measures after being pushed into the corner. Suen, help me this once. You just need to send him to Pan Rugi. After the job is done, I'll give him silver. Or even gold. Shao Qia rested his hands on his knees in silence. Thinking there was hope, Li Jianheng said again, "Don't you hate Shen Wei? Once you fix him this time, Shen Zichuan would not dare to throw his weight before you in the future. Think about it. If he didn't die, he would be able to turn things around. But if he were to be involved in such a shady deal in Kudu, he would lead a life worse than death. Furthermore, isn't the Empress Dowager also thinking of— I thought you were using your brain while speaking." Shao Qia slowly pulled out his legs and said, "Turns out it's all fucking mush inside." Suen. Seeing him leave, Li Jianheng lifted the hem of his robe and chased after him out of the door. Shao Qia stepped out of the building and mounted his horse. Without even turning his head back, he left. Even if they let Shen Zichuan be Pan Rugi's forbidden pleasure, would Pan Rugi dare to accept him? This man was the man the Empress Dowager was always watching with the intent to protect. If Pan Rugi dared to take him, then he would be burning his own bridges. Li Jianheng was out of his mind. But, if Li Jianheng really dared to do that? How would he suddenly dare to do that? Shen Zichuan got off work. He had only just removed his waist token and stepped out of the door when he saw that excellent, handsome steed of Shao Qia. He descended the stairs and asked, "Here to ask for your thumb ring back?" Shao Qia snapped off a branch with leaves and held it between his teeth. He looked at him for a moment and said, "It's broad daylight and you are still not sober? Return it to me. Stop bullshitting me. You weren't this short-tempered that other night." Shen Zichuan looked at the sky. "It would be too humiliating for the Viceroy if you were to stand here and bark like a dog. Which means you aren't here for the thumb ring. So what's the matter? Bit it out. Aren't you well aware of what's the matter?" Shao Qia sat on the rock with his long legs to prop up his elbows and arms. Prince Chu wanted to give Xiaofuzi a thrashing, and you could even get a line on it from inside the temple. I forgot all about it at the turn of the head. But now that I think about it, you must have planted a man by his side, right? If he wasn't an informer, then he was the instigator who told him to do so. If I were that capable, Shen Zichuan said, I would not have been reduced to raising elephants. Who knows if that's the truth or a lie? Shao Qia's eyes were aloof and cold. You have to give me a clear account before I can decide whether or not to believe it. Chapter 20. Decision. Chapter 20. Decision. I'm so wronged. Shen Zichuan said, if anything were to happen now, it's definitely all Shen Lanzhao's fault. There has been trouble after trouble ever since your release. Shao Qia said, Xiaofuzi, the Imperial College, Pan Rugi. How is it that every incident has something to do with you? Shen Zichuan said wryly, that's right. Why is it that they all have something to do with me? Don't you know the reason for this? Back then, the hereditary prince found me in the Chaucer sinkhole. If he had used his blade to end me, then these incidents today would never have happened. Shao Qia took down the branch of leaves and said, back then, you fought to survive and drag out an ignoble existence. Did you only come to realize what it feels like to live today? The calmness in Shen Zichuan's eyes was so placid that Shao Qia found it surreal. This man was extremely odd. It was the same that day during the feast. His every move carried with it an undercurrent of having left behind the past. But Shao Qia could still clearly remember the look in Shen Zichuan's eyes when the latter had bitten him 5 years ago on that snowy night. Such disconnect from reality seemed to be like a bottomless abyss he could not get a grasp of. Those spurts of hatred seemed to have been worn away until others had no way of telling where his limit lay. Everyone at the feast humiliated him, and yet he merely lowered his head and smiled. When Shao Qia had said that he was seeing him in a different light, he had truly meant it. If a man could grin and bear it to this extent, then that darkness under that calm was, on the contrary, all the more disturbing to Shao Qia. What it feels like to be alive. Shen Zichuan smiled again. I can feel it every single day and night while I was in Zhao Zui Temple. Now that I've been released, all the more I find that living isn't easy. I treasure my life. And I'm afraid. But they want me to shoulder this sin and pay for all those human lives with my own. I Shun Lanzhao has only this one life. How is that even enough to pay for them all? I ingratiate myself with everyone in so many ways, all in the hope that second young master and the various nobles will be magnanimous and won't be too hard on me. Today, you want me to give you an account. Second young master, at least give me a reason. By the time Xiao Qia listened to this point, he had already changed his mind. He has a keen nose and he always vaguely felt uneasy every time Shun Zichuan cooperated in such a compliant and docile manner. But Shun Zichuan yielded to neither cajolery nor coercion. No matter how hard Xiao Qia tried to pry it out of him, he could not tell the truth from his lies. He did not believe a word of what Shun Zichuan said. Just as Shun Zichuan had said that night, everyone was just playing along for fun. Since that was the case, so why take it seriously? But although people could lie, the traces left behind could not. He just had to mingle among the 9 schools of thoughts, one in Kudu, and 10 to 1 he would be able to pry something loose. Shun Zichuan wanted to plant a man by Li Jianheng's side, and it was certain that this person would not be an expert. Based on Shun Zichuan's current circumstances, he could only bribe an errand runner or an attendant. This Li Jianheng's matter was questionable both on the inside and on the outside. If he could not investigate this thoroughly, then there will be no end to troubles in the future. Ever since Xiao Qia cast his lot with Prince Chu, he found himself sleeping less. I came looking for you to play. How did it become an interrogation? Xiao Qia changed the topic. He blew the leaves on the branch and lamented, I heard that someone is making inquiries about you recently. This involves Prince Chu's dignity, so naturally, I have to come and ask you. Each time you come finding me to play, Shun Zichuan said, I'll lose sleep for a night. You can't put it that way. Xiao Qia said, you aren't having an easy time, and I'm not having a good time either. We can turn the page on the old grudges between us and let bygones be bygones. Shun Zichuan laughed and said, tens of thousands of lives in the 6 prefectures of Zhongbua were lost. And the second young wants to bury the hatchet with me. Times are different now. Xiao Qia finally threw away the branch. He rose to his feet and said, you have now received the favor of the Hua clan, and you're the man in the Empress Dowager's good graces. How would I still dare to offend you? Calling me second young master sounds so distant. We could be said to be nodding acquaintances now, right, Lanzhao? Shun Zichuan merely smiled and said, second young master, goodbye. Xiao Qia got on his horse and looked at him from above. He said, when are you going to return the thumb ring to me, Lanzhao? A worn-out thumb ring isn't worth a cent, and keeping it will just revolt you. But why is it that instead of returning it to me, you seem like you have come to treat it as a treasure? I wear it on me, Shun Zichuan said to Xiao Qia, just to rely on second young master's ferocious aura to ward off evil. So how would I bear to return it to you this easily? Xiao Qia lashed his horsewhip with a crack and said, don't you know? It's exactly evil aura that your second young master has. Shun Zichuan stood where he was and watched him gallop away into the distance. His smile faded away, leaving only an unfathomable stillness. The setting sun dipped, and the orange light reflected under his feet extended into the shadow of Xiao Qia's gradually disappearing back. Stars adorned the night sky. Grand Mentor Qi opened the newly drawn map and showed it to Shun Zichuan. The former Eastern Palace did not have the authority to deploy troops at the frontier. But it came to receive intimate knowledge from the Ministry of War on the setups of the various lands' garrison troops. This is of the Libei Great Commanderies. It's backed by Hongyan Mountains, and its west leads to Luoxia Pass, while the east overlooks the Biantia 12 tribes. Shun Zichuan pointed at the Hongyan Mountains on the east side. Autumn is around the corner. There is an undersupply of pasture for the Biancha cavalry, so they are bound to rob the mutual trade market at the boundary. Xiao Jiming wants to deploy his troops. So why isn't there a memorial to seeking instructions being sent to Kudu these days? Because His Majesty is severely ill. Grand Mentor Qi pondered over it. This year's spring, Xiao Jiming had only submitted one memorial. He surely has an informant in Kudu. Since he still has yet to submit a memorial for the deployment as of today, then it could only mean one thing. Shun Zichuan said under his breath, His Majesty doesn't have long to live. So, exactly who is it that can secure the imperial court is Xiao Jiming's reason for biding his time now. Grand Mentor Qi took out a brush, dipped it in ink, and drew a circle around Li Bei. Prince Chu's accession to the throne will only benefit the Xiao clan. They have been at odds with the Hua clan for too long. Because of the Zhongbua incident, they have fallen to the disadvantageous position of being under the control of others, and the opportunity to turn the tide in their favor is now right before them. Xiao Jiming will definitely not pass up this opportunity. But teacher has also said that day. Shun Zichuan pointed to Kudu. As long as the gates of Kudu remain closed, Xiao Qia remains the hostage from Li Bei. With him in the Empress Dowager's hand, how is Xiao Jiming able to act? Since you mentioned this matter. Grand Mentor Qi cast aside his brush. Then, I will tell you of another matter. Teacher, please speak. In your view, what kind of man is this Xiao Qia? Shun Zichuan lowered his eyes to look at the map and replied, Sharp. Smart. Doesn't like to follow the step. I think he is. Grand Mentor Qi scratched his head as if he could not think of a suitable word. After a moment of frustration, he sprawled over the table and said mysteriously to Shun Zichuan, I think he is the opportunity heaven sent to Li Bei to turn things around. He's a natural-born talent. Shun Zichuan swung his brush and asked, Why does teacher say so? Grand Mentor Qi immediately got under the table and pulled out the book he had written with his own hand. Over the years, he sensed himself becoming old and forgetful, and so he had recorded down many matters on paper. With swishing sounds, he flipped through several pages, then leaned over the table again and pushed the book to Shun Zichuan. These are the details Gu Qingqing managed to pry from the Ministry of War. In the first year of Yongyi, 8 years ago, Xiao Qia was 14 years of age when he followed Xiao Jiming into battle at Biancha. In the middle of the summer, Xiao Jiming was besieged by 3 Biancha tribes at the eastern side of the Hongyan mountain ranges. His retreat route was cut off, and he was trapped before the Hongjiang River. The Prince of Li Bei's reinforcements did not arrive for 3 days, and Xiao Jiming pressed on with his desperate battle for survival. But the cavalries of the 3 Biancha tribes were nimble. As you know, Li Bei has a legion of armored cavalry. They can deal a powerful blow head-on like a wall of iron, but they can't respond agilely enough to a battle that entails back-and-forth pursuits. Drag it on for too long, and the one exhausted will be Xiao Jiming's troops. Grand Mentor Qi downed a few mouthfuls of wine. But on the 3rd night, Biancha retreated like the ebbing of tide. Because their heavily guarded army provisions were set on fire. The fire spread from the center and threw their rear formation into disarray. Xiao Jiming seized the opportunity to fight a decisive battle and broke through the siege in one night. However, the statement from Li Bei was cut off at this point. The following details were all information that your Shifu took a lot of effort to find out. Can you guess how the heavily guarded army provisions were sent up into flames? Allegedly, the 3 Biancha tribes constructed and dug a trench for lavatory purposes near the river. Xiao Qia silently felt his way from the Hongjiang River to the trench and crawled in that filthy and stinky ditch for half a night. At this point, Grand Mentor Qi stroked his chin. Yet, Li Bei suppressed such a meritorious service and did not report it. Not only that, Xiao Qia came to Kudu and became an idle hoodlum, but how could a loafer have such endurance? Just imagine. Under that kind of circumstances, if he fails, then his eldest brother would be the one to die. Yet, he could lay dormant for 2 days until the Biantia troops let their guards down before he set the fire. Did he know that his eldest brother's life was at stake during those 2 days? And what if he had not set the fire correctly, or if he failed to grasp the timing accurately? 1 minute earlier, and Biantia would strengthen. 1 minute later, and Libe would weaken. Yet, he struck right at that exact timing. How could he have done it if he didn't have extraordinary insight? Shen Zichuan seemed to be moved. At last Grand Mentorchi said, "Moreover, this lad is insanely wild. When he did this, he only brought with him this many people." Grand Mentorchi extended 2 fingers and paused for a moment. "Lanzhou, I thought Pan Rugi transferred him to the Imperial Army to avoid trouble, but it turned out to be a blunder. They thought the Imperial Army was already written off, but what was the Imperial Army's background? They were all from military households who followed the Emperor back then to get into the 8 cities. The 8 great clans did not think much of them, so they relied on the backing of the Emperor alone. But now, the Emperor doesn't want them anymore, and so these 20,000 men became weapons without a master. It's fine if they really fall into the hands of a hedonistic young master. But if they fall into Shao Qia's hand, then what else is there to deter Shao Jiming from deploying troops to protect Prince Chu? So that's it. The part where Shun Zichuan had been puzzling over previously suddenly cleared up. He had thought that since Shao Jiming left Shao Qia in the kudu, then he should understand that this was a pawn under the control of others. Either he abandoned it or acted with prudence. If he was being prudent, then he should not and must not let Shao Qia get so close to Prince Chu. Otherwise, he would be asking for trouble. No matter what he did, he would always be on tenterhooks and cleaning up messes. This bout of autumn chill in Kudu is about to break out in full fury. We lack influence and power, so it'd be best to steer clear of it. Grand Mentor Chi's mouth was parched. He continued, because of the Imperial College incident, a distance has already formed between the Empress Dowager and Shi Guan, as well as with His Majesty. In order to ensure that her authority does not decline, the matter of the imperial heir would be of emergency. If anything were to happen to Prince Chu these days, then the Shao clan's efforts would have been in vain, much like drawing water with a sieve. So it would seem that Shao Qia's urgency to meet you today must have been because he was already on the alert. However, the Empress Dowager herself is more wary and sensitive. Back then, to let Prince Ning ascend to the throne, she did not hesitate to exterminate everyone from the Eastern Palace. So, today, to guard against the unexpected, she will also wipe out Prince Chu. Shao Qia wants to ensure Prince Chu's safety, but I'm afraid that it won't be an easy feat to achieve. Since the Empress Dowager will not use Shi Guan, then the only one left is Ji Lei. Shen Zichuan's eyes were calm. The experts in the imperial bodyguards are as plentiful as clouds, and they are clean and efficient in their jobs. The fight between those in power is one thing. Grand Mentor Qi said. It's time for you to decide whether to pursue Prince Chu or follow the Empress Dowager. Shen Zichuan extended his hand and covered the map. Chapter 21, Autumn Hunt. Chapter 21. Autumn Hunt. It rained several times in the 10th month of the lunar year, following which the maple leaves in Mount Feng turned red. Shen Zichuan had already caught sight of some slight frost while herding the elephants during the morning court. Emperor Xianda's illness improved somewhat along with the coming of autumn. Word had it that his meals had resumed, and his coughing during the morning court had eased off a lot. According to tradition, the emperor could only head to the Nanlin One hunting grounds only in the 11th month. But Emperor Xianda seemed to be worried that traveling might prove difficult in cold weather, so he gave orders for the preparations of the autumn hunt to be carried out at the start of the 10th month. The ones responsible for patrol duty are still the 8 great training divisions and the imperial bodyguards. Chun Yang carried the blade for Shao Qia and said, "Viceroy, didn't His Majesty flew into a rage the last time?" That was last time. Shao Qia had just come from the military drill grounds. He wiped his sweat. His Majesty was furious last time because he felt that there were safety concerns both on the inside and on the outside. But it's different this time. Shi Guan had been despised and shunned by Her Majesty. Having been left out in the cold for 2 months, he will be desperately wanting to put himself back into the limelight. Are such small favors able to move Shi Guan? When Chun Yang saw no one nearby, he said, "After all, Her Majesty has been gaining power for a long time, and His Majesty is ill. Even if he is willing to hand Shi Guan an olive branch, Shi Guan wouldn't dare to accept it, would he? You said it yourself, that it's a small favor." Xiao Qia put on the outer garment he had grabbed. What if His Majesty gave Shi Guan great power and authority? A few days ago, His Majesty even asked about the age of the Shi clan's daughter. Prince Chu does not have a princess consort. If he really bestowed marriage upon them, then even if Shi Guan did not have the intent to, it would appear differently to Her Majesty. Chun Yang said, "A pity we don't have a missy at home." "It's better that way," Xiao Qia said. "If I were to have a sister, she would have to be like Commander-in-Chief Qi. Otherwise, she would have no control over her life. Most likely, she will be forced to marry a husband she has never seen before." Having said to this point, he slowed his pace. The Hua clan has always been the first choice for imperial concubines. At this age, Hua Xiangyi, who has been raised and nurtured by the Empress Dowager, has yet to be bestowed a marriage. Even His Majesty does not dare to offend her, and could only call her his younger sister. When it comes to whom she will be betrothed to in the future, it's Her Majesty's arrangements that they still have to go along with. Chun Yang said, "Fortunately, our hereditary prince is already married. But who else can third Missy Hua be betrothed to? Viceroy, I really can't tell at all. The Qi clan is the best choice." Xiao Qia smiled. If Qi Juin was born a man, the Empress Dowager would have long betrothed third Missy Hua to her. A pity Qi Juin is a girl, and the Hua clan does not have any man of lawful birth in this generation. So they can only eye this piece of meat but not move their chopstick. They are getting anxious. The horse was led over and Xiao Qia stroked it. "Come on. Let's go to the East Market on Donglong Street again." Shen Zichuan had only just stepped into Donglong Street. Having been released from his imprisonment, he could naturally no longer stay in Zhao Zui Temple. As no one mentioned it at the outset, this matter was set aside. But in the 8th month, Qiao Tianya suddenly took notice of it and followed him to Zhao Zui Temple. When he saw Grand Mentor Qi all covered in mud acting like a lunatic, he got Shun Zichuan to open an account in advance with the imperial bodyguards so that he could find a proper place to live in. Thus, at the end of the 9th month, Shun Zichuan moved to an old alley. The rent was cheap and the place suitable for his current status. "Who exactly is this person Shifu wants me to find?" Shin Zichuan took the indenture 3 and looked at the word Songyue. The place of origin above was blank. Gu Qingqing looked around the crowd and said, "Uncle didn't mention it either. He only said that the teacher has permitted it. That is, to let this person take care of your daily living in the future." After Shen Zichuan moved out of Zhao Zui Temple, it became inconvenient for him to communicate with Grand Mentor Qi. He was unwilling to raise messenger pigeons. Firstly, it was too easy to expose themselves, and secondly, Xiao Qia's gerfalcon was too fierce. It left a deep impression on him. At present, they could only rely on Ji Gang and meet up when Ji Gang used his identity as an errand runner to venture outdoors to make purchases. It was extremely inconvenient, but they had no better option for the time being. He should be in the East Market. Shen Zichuan said to Gu Qingqing, "Let's go for a look." Donglong Street was near Kaling River. It was a pleasure district. There was a trading market set up on the eastern side to deal in human goods. Those who were selling themselves to bury their parents would also choose this place to kneel. Because the common households and residences would all come here to pick errand runners or maidservants. Shao Qie gripped a register of names from Prince Chu's residence with the intention to come here to investigate some of the men's origins. He had only just strode out of the middleman's place when he saw a familiar nape. Chen Yang said, "Isn't that?" Shao Qie raised his hand, and Chen Yang fell silent. Shen Zichuan kept the indenture. Feeling a chill on his nape, he looked back. Shao Qie was already standing behind him. "Oh, a bigwig," Shen Zichuan said. "Why are you standing behind me?" "Looking at you." Shao Qie stuffed away the register in passing and strolled over to Shen Zichuan's side. "Are you here to buy servants?" Shen Zichuan said, as if in jest. "I'm selling myself. How on earth can I afford to buy someone? Already reduced to such a state, huh?" Shao Qie sized him up. "Isn't it said that many people are seeking you at high prices?" "It's all about the feels." Shen Zichuan continued to walk. "They have to catch my eye before I can decide whether to receive them or not." 5. Shao Qie knew what kind of men they were and said, "It sure isn't easy to choose between the ugly and the repulsive, is it? I'm no match for the second young master." Shen Zichuan looked askance at him. "Following Prince Chu must have given you your fair share of flesh," 6. Shao Qie said. "Envious? Come look for me." Shen Zichuan smiled too and said, "I haven't been reduced to that stage yet." Both men had almost arrived at the end. Shen Zichuan turned aside and said, "Then I won't bother second young master to accompany me further. I'm heading back." "No hurry." Shao Qie remained where he was. "This autumn hunt, we still have to look out for each other. The Imperial bodyguards and the Imperial army have no common ground." Shen Zichuan looked at him. "So what is there for me to look out for you?" Shao Qie said, "How distant. If I often go over to you to stretch my legs, we can come to share a common ground." Shen Zichuan did not answer him. After he left, Shao Qie was still rooted at the same spot. "Who is he looking for in this place?" Shao Qie gently stroked the hilt of the blade with his thumb. "Gu Qingqing. As expected, it's Gu Qingqing. Chen Yang. Here. Go and check it out." Shao Qie said, "Look into all 18 generations of Gu Qingqing's ancestors." 7. After Shen Zichuan's search for the man had been disrupted by Shao Qie, he was placed on consecutive rotational duties, and so he did not manage to find any more free time. On the eve of the autumn hunt, it was finally his turn to receive an assignment. Sure enough, it was to accompany the emperor to the Nanlin hunting grounds. One day, Shen Zichuan got off work and returned home. Before pushing the door open, he sensed the presence of someone else in the house. With a cloak around him, Feng Quan drank his tea with his fingers sticking up and said from the other side of the door, "Aren't you coming in?" Shen Zichuan pushed the door open. There was no light lit in the house. With his snow-white face immersed in the darkness, Feng Quan looked like a wandering soul. He set aside the tea and said, "I'm here to convey a message from Her Majesty." Shen Zichuan threw his dirty robe on the small clothes rack 9 with curvy raised ends and said, "Thank you for the trouble." "Yeah." Feng Quan looked at Shen Zichuan maliciously and tossed him an object. "If it weren't a matter of urgency, would I have needed to come in person? You have been graced with so many favors from the Empress Dowager. And now it's time to repay it all one at a time. If this matter falls through this autumn hunt, then you won't be able to survive through it either." Shen Zichuan caught the object. It was an Eastern Pearl 10 wrapped in a strip of cloth. A wipe of his fingertip revealed the ink traces of half a character on the strip of cloth. Lin. 11. Chu. 12. Shen Zichuan's eyes shifted back to Feng Quan's face. Feng Quan stood up and walked over to Shen Zichuan. He said, "If you succeed, the Empress Dowager can still spare your life and treat you like a dog to order around. But if you fail, then there's no point in keeping you. Martial arts experts will be as plentiful as trees in a forest." Shen Zichuan said, "I'll try my best." Feng Quan stared daggers at him for a while before he let out a mocking smile. He strode out of the door, shook on his cloak, and melted away into the darkness of the night. Shen Zichuan lit a lamp and stood by the side of the table as he burned away the strip of cloth. The tongue of the flame licked the fabric, turning the word Lin into ashes. The Nanlin hunting grounds was located on the southeast side of Kudu and encompassed a wide area. Half of the usual ingredients used by the court of imperial entertainments came from this place. The 8 great training division forces, half of which had been mobilized, followed after the emperor in a grand display of might. Shen Zichuan was herding the elephants when he heard the thunderous sounds of galloping horse hooves. He did not have to look back to know whose horse it was. Sure enough, he saw the gerfalcon swoop over his head and haul up a wild mouse from among the grass before it went soaring into the sky again. Xiao Qie and Li Jianheng, along with a group of rich young masters from Kudu, spurred their horses past him and noisily dashed straight ahead. The jet-black steed with a snow-white patch on its chest under him was truly a conspicuous sight. Xiao looked up in envy and said, "This Viceroy Zhao's eagle and horse are all wonderful treasures." Shen Zichuan said, "All wild animals." Xiao was young and could not stand loneliness, so he was always wanting to converse with Shen Zichuan. Sitting on the horse, he munched on dried sweet potatoes 13 and said in a Huaizhou accent, "Chuan Ji, do you know the names of that horse and eagle?" Shen Zichuan smiled and said, "They are wild, there's only so much they can be called." Xiaowu stretched his body out and said expressively, "That eagle is called Meng. Don't you think it sounds fierce? But that horse's name isn't fierce. It's called Lang Tao Shuijin." He enunciated each word, sounding so childlike that it amused the group of adults. Gasping for breath, Li Jianheng looked back and said to Xiao Qie, "Man, each time I see him, I always wonder why he wasn't born a woman." Xiao Qie turned around the horse and looked at Li Jianheng. Li Jianheng said, I know. I'm not befuddled to that extent. When we arrive at the venue in a moment," Xiao Qie said, "you have to tell me when you venture out. Don't stray away from the guards around night time. Not one of the women you brought must be allowed into the tent either." "I didn't bring a woman along." Li Jianheng put on a bold front to quibble. Xiao Qie threw him an indescribably wicked smile. Behind them, Chen Yang spurred his horse on and caught up to them. He said, "Viceroy, I've gotten someone to send all those women back." Upset, Li Jianheng bit the tip of his tongue. After a while, he said, "Suen, honestly speaking, if you won't even let me sleep with them, then what fun is there to be had at the autumn hunt?" "Plenty." Xiao Qie said, "Even basking in the sun is more interesting than you being cooped up in the tent." Li Jianheng kept sighing as he continued on, listless and dejected, with the rest of the journey. When they arrived, it was nearly dark. Shen Zichuan was not on duty on the first day, so he stayed behind to do odd jobs. Qiao Tianya came too, and called the imperial bodyguards over to treat them to some meat. He saw the bowl in Shen Zichuan's hand and suddenly said, "So you can drink, huh?" Shen Zichuan said, "Just a bowl." Qiao Tianya did not expose him. This man did not look like an imperial bodyguard. He was more like someone from the martial fraternity. He used a dagger to wipe the roast meat and said, "Eat all you can now that you are at the hunting ground. This happens only once a year. What you are eating is all stuff the palace usually uses. So seize the opportunity before you miss it." He chewed on the meat and said, "You have to bring a blade while you are on duty. When your turn comes tomorrow night, use Qingqing's blade. Why didn't you bring one? Didn't the domesticated elephant's office teach you 2 stances? The blade is too heavy." Looking as though he was too weak to lift it, Shen Zichuan said, "It's too much for me to carry it along with me." "The bones in your body," Qiao Tianya said, "couldn't have been broken by that kick of second young Master Xiao, could it? What a pity. That's a first-grade hoodlum, we can't extort him. Otherwise, with that one kick, this older brother can fleece him out of all his family fortune." The imperial bodyguards around them laughed. Shen Zichuan moved the corners of his lips. As he sipped the wine, he took a quick look around along the rim of the bowl. All of them were inseparable from their blades. Other than him, who else was here to kill Prince Chu? Apart from those present here, there were still the assassins in the unseen shadows, and how many of them were lying in wait with cool detachment. Even if Shao Qie was a natural-born talent, what were the odds that he could successfully protect Prince Chu under this heavy siege? Several tents away, Shao Qie and Li Jianheng were still drinking wine and playing dice with the others. Chapter 22 Thunder. Chapter 22 Thunder. The next morning, Emperor Xiande assumed personal command over the autumn hunts arena. His health did not permit him to go hunting on a horse, so he prepared some rewards and ordered the men present to head to the hunting grounds to try their luck at winning a prize. Li Jianheng could not get on his horse and had to make several attempts before he could hoist himself onto it. Emperor Xiande looked at him and said, "Jianheng will lead by example. I'll be waiting to have a taste of your prey." Li Jianheng gripped the reins. He had already given instructions to his guards. Even if he could not hit a target, he would not return empty-handed. So he set out in high spirits with a bunch of guards following closely behind him. Shao Qie rode his horse beside him. There was a stretch of forest at the end of the vast expanse of grassland at the Nanlin hunting grounds. Morning dews hung on branches and leaves that had yellowed. Startled by the shouts and sounds of horses' hooves, prey of all sizes that had been set loose scattered among the undergrowth. Clenching his bow as he sat on his horse, Li Jianheng drew the string apart with great effort and fired an arrow at a rabbit. The arrow jabbed feebly into the ground some distance away from the rabbit. Blind applause and cheers first rang out at the sides, then the guard who had gone over to take a look brought back a rabbit that had been prepared in advance. Satisfied, Li Jianheng said to Shao Qie, "My archery skill isn't bad, right? It was Imperial Grandpa who taught me back then." Shao Qie said sincerely, "I have never seen such a display of archery prowess even in Li Bei." Li Jianheng immediately laughed and said, "You have been in Kudu for so long, you couldn't have forgotten how to draw a bow, could you?" Shao Qie had only brought an ordinary bow along. It was not even as good as the ones the imperial bodyguards used. He said, "Let me show you my skill too." With that, Shao Qie drew his bow and fired an arrow at the clearing before him. His shot was even weaker than Prince Chu's. It did not even stab into the ground. Blind cheers and exultation rang out from the sides again. Shao Qie reveled in it. Qian Tianya had already grown impatient waiting behind them. Amused when he saw this scene, he said, "See that? If you don't train well, you'll be treated like a fool." Looking at Shao Qie's shoulders and arms, Shen Zichuan was once again reminded of that piece of bone thumb ring. He could not help but smile. Prince Chu had not ridden for long when his back ached. It dampened his willingness to go further. This was the result of having too much to drink last night. At the moment, he was not feeling well all over. He led the horse and wandered around aimlessly for a while, enduring it until it was almost time before he urged his men back. The guards at the back had not even finished shooting all their arrows when they escorted him back like a gust of wind. They did not even head to the forest in the east. Li Jianheng dismounted the horse and kneeled before the emperor. At the side, Pan Rugi made an inventory count of the prey for Emperor Xiande. The more Li Jianheng heard, the more pleased he was. He said, "Imperial elder brother, there's even a red fox. What an excellent fur color. It'll make the perfect fur collar for you." Emperor Xiande was pleased too. He said, "I feel even more spirited now than I was back in Kudu. Pan Rugi, give the stuff to Prince Chu." Li Jianheng lifted the silk fabric with great delight, only to see a great bow no ordinary man could draw presented underneath. He instantly lost interest, although he still had to say, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for the reward." Emperor Xiande laughed and coughed a few times before saying, "You don't like it? This isn't meant for you to use either. This bow was left behind by the great ancestor Emperor One in the early years. It's made of black iron coupled with keel and weighs 120 kg. Even the current 4 great generals cannot draw it. Bestowing it upon you is because I want you to be diligent at all times. When you face this bow, remember the hardships of the great ancestor emperor in his great undertaking to establish the empire. Li Jianheng acknowledged his words and called for his men to carry the bow away. During dinner, Emperor Xiande called Li Jianheng over to sit with him and leaned against him. This was a hint that could not be any more obvious. All the officials presented knew it, but they still had to play dumb because Secretariat Elder Hua Xiqian, was still on an equal footing with Prince Chu. Once everyone had their fill of wine and food, a bonfire was started. Emperor Xiande had not retreated this whole day, and so all those present could not leave either. Li Jianheng had already grown tired of sitting, but then, he saw that Emperor Xiande still had no intent to retreat for a rest. What's going on? Li Jianheng cast a questioning gaze at Xiao Qie. Xiao Qie pretended not to notice. By this time, the singing and dancing had already receded, and the flame of the bonfire was raging. Emperor Xiande suddenly gathered his clothes and called out, "My dear Minister Hai." Hai Liangyi tidied his robe and respectfully kneeled before the emperor to answer, "This old subject is here." Emperor Xiande asked, "What were you going to do today?" Hai Liangyi kowtowed and replied, "This old subject would like to recommend the Chief Supervising Secretary of the Sixth Ministry's Office of Scrutiny for Revenue, Shuexiuzhua, to be given the authority to submit a petition before your Majesty." Hua Xiqian had already sensed something going on. He stroked his beard and said, "Rensure, why put it in such a way? To begin with, the Chief Supervising Secretary has the authority to remonstrate directly with His Majesty." "That may be so," Hai Liangyi said, "but Shuexiuzhua's Memorial 3 has repeatedly failed to reach His Majesty. He might as well seek a direct audience with His Majesty." "How could there be a memorial that couldn't make its way to His Majesty?" Hua Xiqian asked. Emperor Xiande said, "I'm curious too. My dear Minister Hai, call him up to say his piece." Having received the command, Pan Rugi exchanged looks with Hua Xiqian and strode 2 steps out to call out, "Summon the Chief Supervising Secretary of the Office of Scrutiny for Revenue, Shuexiuzhua, for an audience with His Majesty." Shuexiuzhua was not wearing his official robe. He looked travel-worn as though he had just dismounted from his horse. He did not look at anyone when he made his way up. Instead, he kneeled first to kowtow and pay his obeisances to Emperor Xiande. "What do you have to report?" Emperor Xiande asked amid the wind. Shuexiuzhua said, "This subject is the Supervising Secretary of the Office of Scrutiny. My key task is to audit the financial affairs of the Ministry of Revenue in minute details. In the 3rd month of the 5th year of Xiande, for this subject audited the expenditure ledger for the 4th year of Xiande and discovered a subsidy of 2 million taels recorded. For the sake of prudence, especially in the light of the Ministry of Revenue's statement that it was a subsidy to the 13 cities of Jueshi, this subject personally made a trip to Jueshi. The Provincial Administration Commissioner of Jueshi, Jiang Qinshan, conducted a reconciliation of the accounts with this subject and discovered that out of the subsidy allocated in the 4th year of Xiande, only 1,530,000 taels had been given to Jueshi for real. The remaining 470,000 taels had vanished without a trace. Following this, in the 8th month of the same year, the Ministry of War disbursed the salaries and provisions to the troops at the frontiers. The Ministry of Revenue allocated 2,800,000 taels for this purpose. Of that amount, 1,800,000 taels were for Chidong 5 Commandery's garrison troops, and 1,000,000 taels were for Libei Great Commandery. But by the time this subject chased the money to Luoxia Pass after it was handed down, there were only 830,000 taels left. And this goes on, incident after incident. The deficit of the state treasury is such a huge sum. Where has all the money gone? Who took them? Elder Secretariat Hua may be unsure, but this subject has the records to submit for His Majesty's perusal. "You are spouting nonsense," Hua Xiqian denounced him in a cold tone. The Ministry of Revenue has to reconcile the accounts at the beginning of the year right in the palace itself. How is it that you just had to be the one to know when the Minister of Revenue, Grand Secretariat, and the brush-holding director of the Imperial Palace's Directorate of Ceremonial all had no idea that there was a deficit? Hai Liangi raised his head and said in a steady voice, "This old subject knows." Starting from the second year of Xianda, the account books submitted by the Ministry of Revenue have been split into real and fake copies. When it comes to deciding what is handed over every year, it's not the Minister of Revenue's words that counts, but yours, Hua Xiqian. The crackle of the bonfire exploded like a sudden burst of thunder that struck everyone present into silence. None of them had expected Emperor Xianda to raise tough questions in such a manner so suddenly. "Fine." Hua Xiqian laughed and slapped the table to get up. "So you are making up wild charges now? What Hua faction? All the lands in the world belong to the Emperor. I, Hua Xiqian, have been open and aboveboard in everything I have done. All along, I've placed His Majesty first. If there are any dubious accounts, take them out now. Zheng Guoshi, tally it with him." The Minister of Revenue, Zheng Guoshi, kneeled down in a fluster and said, "Your Majesty, this subject would like to ask Chief Supervising Secretary Shui a question. Since it's the accounts for the fourth year of Xianda that has a problem, why did he wait until today to bring it up? If there is truly a problem with it, then wouldn't he have held up a major issue?" Shui Xiozhua quickly said, "Nowadays, the local officials who have entered the capital do not meet their superiors nor pay obeisance to your Majesty. Instead, they first send a visitation card 5 and head over to the Hua residence and Pangongong's secondary residence to pay their respects. The Hua faction is so powerful and influential. It may well be asked who still wouldn't dare to follow the lead of Secretariat Elder Hua. Every year, I have to tell the delegated investigating censors to just voice it out if there is a problem. What do I have to fear? The account ledgers of my Hua clan have all been presented before His Majesty. It's all clear and aboveboard." Hua Xiqian stared at Shui Xiozhua. "Shui Yanqing, do you still remember who gave you a recommendation when you had to enter Kudu to be an official during the years of Yongyi? I could be partially considered your teacher, and yet you framed me like this." Shui Xiozhua raised his head and met Hua Xiqian's eyes for a moment. He said, "On the imperial court, there is only the ruler and his ministers. There is no teacher and his student." Hua Xiqian turned to Emperor Xianda and asked, "Does your Majesty believe it?" Emperor Xianda lowered his eyelids and said, "I believe the accounts." Hua Xiqian raised his head and burst out laughing. He joined his palms together and said, "Fine. Your Majesty, it was a turbulent period in Kudu back then, and the former emperor chose you on his deathbed. Do you still remember who was the one who supported you, who protected and escorted you all the way? But tonight you believed it because of a few disloyal and unfilial scums." Emperor Xianda raised his hand to drink the tea. He finally looked at Hua Xiqian. With his eyes brimming with loathing, he said, "Shouldn't you be clear whether that was protecting and escorting or coercing and commanding a prince?" Hua Xiqian suddenly shoved aside the table and said, "Ji Lei." The imperial bodyguards at the feast drew their blades with a swoosh. Hai Liangi said, "The audacity of you to rebel. I wouldn't dare." Hua Xiqian said, "But you are already forcing the blades right at me now. Surely you don't expect me to sit and wait to be killed, do you?" "What do you want?" Emperor Xianda said coldly, "Shi Guan." The 8 great training divisions suddenly strode a step forward to stand before the emperor. "Take down Hua Xiqian," Emperor Xianda commanded. "Don't you dare!" Hua Xiqian bellowed. "Shi Guan, your wife and child are now having tea with the Empress Dowager. If you dare to take another step forward, the lineage of the Shi clan will be severed. The Empress Dowager has treated you well over the years, but you have been repeatedly instigated by others. It is still not too late for you to turn back." Shi Guan had originally been forced and left without a choice. Now, he took a slight step back, afraid. Emperor Xianda said in a sinister voice, "Not too late?" Shi Guan, was it not too late for the former crown prince? Was it not too late for Shenwei? Which of them weren't more loyal than you were? They retreated, but did the Empress Dowager let them off? I have already asked them to draft an imperial edict. As long as Prince Chu ascended to the throne in the future, the daughter of the Shi clan will be the Empress of the Empire. It has already become a usual practice for His Majesty to issue and rescind his orders. And you still dare to harbor such wishful thinking? Hua Xiqian flicked his sleeves. His Majesty has gone muddle-headed from his illness. Imperial concubine Wei is already half a month pregnant, so how can Prince Chu ascend to the throne? Shi Guan gripped his blade. His forehead was drenched in sweat. Layers and layers of dark clouds had already shrouded the night sky. The wind before the eve of a rainstorm ceased too. Banners of flags at the hunting grounds flapped. No one moved. Gritting his teeth, Shi Guan drew out his blade and turned to Emperor Xianda. With some difficulty, he said, "The illness of His Majesty is beyond cure. I gave you a chance." Emperor Xianda looked at Shi Guan and gradually began to laugh. The more he laughed, the louder he became. And the louder he was, the more he coughed. He braced himself against the table and said frostily, "If I did not have total confidence when I came to this autumn hunt, then how could I hunt down and kill treacherous ministers and traitors like you? Qi Juin is already leading the troops over to come to my aid. She should be here within 4 hours. So who are you killing? HM? Who dares to?" Ji Lei suddenly piped up. "Commander-in-Chief Qi is far away in the Zhangjuan Commandery in Qidong. The imperial bodyguards are responsible for all incoming and outgoing correspondences. Your Majesty, it's time for you to wake up from your dreams." Emperor Xianda glared furiously at him and said, "Qi Pan Rugi," suddenly covered Emperor Xianda's mouth and forced him to sit down. He looked around the crowd and smiled. His Majesty is having a relapse of his illness. All the civil servants' legs were trembling. Hua Xiqian looked at Li Jianheng and grinned nastily as he said, "Prince Chu harbored the intent to stage a revolt at the hunting grounds. He even brought a bow and arrows along. The evidence against him is conclusive. What are you waiting for? Kill him." Except for the guards beside him, the cold gleams of blades suddenly erupted all around. Li Jianheng dropped his chopsticks in shock. As he retreated, he tumbled onto the ground along with his seat. He said, "Secretariat, Secretariat Elder, I have no intent to proclaim myself the Emperor." "Your Highness," Hua Xiqian said, "do you know how the 4 words, 'in spite of oneself,' is written?" Thunder exploded in the sky. Hearing the swarm of footsteps towards him, Li Jianheng hid among his guards. He could not even stand up as he said in a teary voice, "I'm an idle prince by nature. So why go to such an extent?" The gleam of a blade flashed past before him, and Li Jianheng held his head and yelled. But then, he heard a tremendous crash, and the table before him overturned with a bang. Someone gripped his back collar and lifted him up. "His Majesty bestowed the conqueror bow upon you, and so you are the crown prince of Dezhou." Shao Qia let out a sinister smile. "As the viceroy of the imperial army in Kudu, I, Shao Suan, want to see who will meet their fates under this blade of mine. Chunyang, help the crown prince up the horse." Shao II. Ji Lei slowly drew out his blade. "On account of the friendship between us, do you have to do this tonight? I've been fooling around for so long." Shao Qia released Li Jianheng. "I'm itching for a fight. 6. Capture him." Ji Lei said, "As long as there is no danger to the second young master's life, it's fine to break his arms and legs." Shao Qia took off his cumbersome outer robe, only to reveal a body-fitting Jinzhuang 7 underneath. He cast a glance around and said, "Whoever is able to break my arms and legs, I will not only award him 100 taels of gold, but also call him master." Longly blade, which had almost never once left its sheath in kudu, steadily slid out. Inch by inch, light the color of snow glinted, along with a frosty, murderous aura that intimidated. But if he can't break them, then his life is forfeited. Chapter 23, Downpour. Chapter 23. Downpour. A gale assailed across the grass of the hunting grounds. The instant the flame leaped, the sudden sound of blades colliding against one another erupted. The feast was thrown into chaos. Hai Liangi climbed up from the ground. With a burst of unexpected energy, he slammed headlong into Pan Rugi and bellowed, "Castrated traitor! Don't hurt my lord!" Li Jianheng was on the horse, trembling all over as he watched the glinting and flashing display of cold steels. Clinging on to the horse's neck, he closed his eyes and cried out, "Suan! Suan, save me!" All of a sudden, Xiao Qia kicked Ji Lei back into a retreat. Without even looking back, he backhandedly stabbed the Imperial bodyguard who was attempting to launch a sneak attack behind him and snuffed the life out of the latter. Warm blood spattered over half of his body. He pulled out Longly blade, took 2 steps forward, and struck the 8 Great Training Division's soldier charging at him to the ground. Chen Yang had already flipped atop the horse. He hauled Li Jianheng up, whistled at the top of his voice, and shouted to Prince Chu's guards, "Follow me to protect His Highness. We'll break through the siege towards the east." Before the horses could move, Ji Lei said in a cold voice, "Stop him." Ji Lei had yet to finish his word when he saw a blade slashing down on him. He held up his blade horizontally to block it. The next moment, both his arms sank down heavily as Xiao Qia's blow pained and numbed them. A sound escaped from Ji Lei's throat as the impact sent him staggering. Astonished, he looked before him. "Xiao II, you played dumb to exploit the situation for your own ends." Ji Lei crouched abruptly with legs astride and forcibly lifted his blade. He bellowed in fury, "I've misjudged you." A gust of wind assaulted from the side, and Xiao Qia turned his head to dodge the attack. He swept the edge of his blade in a diagonal arc on his right, and a stream of glistening blood followed in its trajectory. Following right after, his blade collided with Ji Lei's once again. Lang Tao Shui Jin charged in, knocked over the table, and dragged the tablecloth along with it as it galloped through the bonfire. In that moment, the fire surged, setting tents and withered grass on fire. The very instant Lang Tao Shui Jin brushed past him, Xiao Qia flipped atop its back. With the back of his blade, he swatted the buttocks of the horse Prince Chu was on and said a deep voice, "Go! Protect His Majesty." Shui Xiuzhua strode over to pull Hai Liangi away. "Elder Hai, let us go to protect His Majesty." Emperor Xianda gasped for breath. His lips and face were pale. Shui Xiuzhua squatted down to hoist Emperor Xianda over his shoulder and fled from the fire along with the other civil officials. Shi Guan wanted to give chase, but Hua Xiqin pointed directly at Prince Chu and said, "His Majesty's fate is sealed, so there's no need for us to kill or not kill him. But Prince Chu must die tonight. If he escapes, then you and I will be labeled as the traitorous party. Ji Lei, gather the Imperial bodyguards and join forces with the 2,000 garrison troops in the city of Tuanqing to surround the hunting grounds. You must kill Prince Chu. Shi Guan, hurry back to the capital at top speed. The 8 Great Training Divisions will take charge of protecting Kudu." By the time he spoke to this point, he had calmed down. "We have the Imperial heir in our hands, and the Empress Dowager in command. As long Kudu doesn't fall into chaos, even Qi Juin herself will not be able to act rashly if Prince Chu dies. As for the Xiao clan, there will be plenty of opportunities to deal with them in the future." The stench of blood on Xiao Qia was thick and heavy. His lips were tightly pursed as he killed everyone in his path the entire journey. Whoever dared to block his way, Longly Blade would decapitate that person, regardless of whose camp they were in. Li Jianheng's stomach lurched. But he covered his lips and did not dare to puke. The remaining 40 men at the sides were all Xiao Qia's personal guards. The steed under his legs galloped away without a moment's pause. Behind them, the imperial bodyguards followed hot on their tails. Just as their group galloped to the front of the forest, Xiao Qie suddenly commanded, "Scatter!" The remaining 40 men tore off their guard attires in unison to reveal riding outfits that were exactly the same as Li Jianheng's. Then, the procession dispersed with a loud clamor and charged into the forest from various spots. With dark clouds shrouding the moon, there was no way anyone could tell the direction in which Prince Chu had fled under the darkness, especially from a distance away. Ji Lei reined in his horse outside the forest and turned his head aside to spit. He said, "Surround the hunting grounds. Dig deep and search. If you encounter Xiao II, don't engage him in a one-on-one fight. Form a team of at least 4 men and attack him from all sides." Branches kept whipping across his face, hurting Li Jianheng so much that he kept using his arm to shield his face. The surrounding guards had already dispersed, leaving only Xiao Qie and Chen Yang beside him. "Dismount." Xiao Qie lifted Li Jianheng and threw him to the ground to let Chen Yang take over. Li Jianheng tumbled until even his head was soiled with dirt and earth. He said in a plaintive voice, "Suan, Suan, what are you going to do?" "Your Highness, please follow me." Chen Yang pulled Li Jianheng up. "It's too conspicuous to travel on a horse through the forest. The imperial bodyguards are experts at encirclement and assassination. Riding a horse is like being a live target. We can't take this risk." "I'm not leaving." Li Jianheng fearfully yanked his arm back and pleaded, "Suan, you are the only one who can protect me." Xiao Qie said, "Knock him out and carry him away." With that, he turned the horse around without waiting for Li Jianheng to reply and galloped away deeper into the forest. Lightning flashed in the sky, illuminating the sinister forest with layers upon layers of spooky shadows. The sounds of horses' hooves, of blades being drawn, and of men dashing rang out in succession. The only thing missing was the sound of people speaking. A whiff of the impending rainstorm wafted through the dark night. Xiao Qie did not know how long he had been fleeing for. Lang Tao Shuijin gradually came to a halt. Dead silence suddenly descended all around. Raindrops came pelting down from the sky, and a drop shot down before Xiao Qie's eyes. The darkness, amid that soundless drip, looked as if a monstrous creature was creeping slowly out of it. Countless imperial bodyguards stalked towards Xiao Qie like a tightly woven net of oppressive darkness spreading towards him. No one gave orders. Rain pattered down, and the sharp end of a Xiuquan blade sliced through the water droplets. In the twinkling of an eye, it reached the side of Xiao Qie's neck. At the same time Xiao Qie bent his head, Longly blade left its sheath. With a clang, the back of the blade halted the retracting momentum of the Xiuquan blade. He pressed Longly blade back into its sheath again. There was an ear-piercing sound of scraping as the damaged sharp edge of the Xiuquan blade cracked. Along with its master, it was kicked back. Both tumbled and fell into the rainwater. Numerous figures abruptly leaped up from all 4 sides of his horse. Xiao Qie clapped his palm on the back of the horse. His entire body leaped out of the saddle, and once again, Longly blade left its sheath. This time, the glint of the blade swept across, splitting open skin and flesh in a ring around him. Blood spattered onto his face and trickled down to his chin along with the sound of human bodies dropping. Xiao Qie landed back onto the back of the horse but did not sit on it. Instead, he maintained a crouching posture with the edge of his blade partially sheathed. The sound of breathing, the pattering of rain. In this pitch-dark night where one was as good as blindfolded, Xiao Qie had already used his ears and hearing to its maximum capacity. Not one of the imperial bodyguards who had been wounded earlier made a sound. Those closely woven footsteps circled around him a short distance away, forming an indestructible encirclement with him in its center. He who was impatient right this moment would expose his weakness. Xiao Qie waited in silence, and it was in this moment that Xiao Tianyao, who was hiding in the darkness, truly realized what being a lone wolf meant. Xiao Qie was so unhurried and calm that it was as if the more precarious and dangerous the situation he found himself in, the more cool-headed and unpredictable he could be. And that blade of his was the fangs he bared this very night. Xiao Tianyao felt a rare sense of restlessness. The source of this fretfulness came from his order not to kill Xiao Qie. It was far harder to trap and thwart this kind of dangerous predator than to kill him, because more often than not there was only one chance they had to get close to him. If they could not take him down, then they would end up slaughtered by this man. Xiao Tianyao closed his eyes. When he opened them again, ruthlessness brimmed in them. He pulled out his own Xiuquan blade and took a step out. The next moment, there was a flash of his figure as he burst into action and hacked down on Xiao Qie's back with a lightning move of his hand. Xiao Qie reversed his blade to parry the blow and turned around to kick Xiao Tianyao on his abdomen. The men from the remaining 3 sides slashed their blades down on him in unison. He stopped the blades with one arm, but someone saw an opening on his left and sliced the sharp end of his blade towards his face. Xiao Qie struck his elbow at the side of the blade. The blade swung sideways along with Xiao Qie's elbow as he slammed the other man in the face with it and sent the latter flipping over to the ground. Once again, Xiao Tianyao followed closely on his heels. The rain fell in torrents. There was no shouting, only the sound of blades. Rainwater had scrubbed away at Xiao Qie's facial features until they looked all the more ferocious. In this never-ending encirclement, he maintained the acuity that was specific to him and him alone. Time and time again, he warded off the onslaught of assault led by Xiao Tianyao, moving in the darkness as though he was treading on thin ice. Xiao Tianyao pressed on with his offensive. They were indeed experts at drawn-out encirclement. Was a lone wolf terrifying? They just had to surround him and wear down his patience and calmness into nothingness. He would surely reveal a weak point once they tire him out with their never-ending attacks. Pressure from the intense flurry of blades gradually made Xiao Qie breathless. The downpour masked some of the finer details in the surroundings, like the crossbow being pulled out under the cover of darkness. The more Xiao Qie fought, the more fierce he was. The blood under his blade flowed endlessly. But all of a sudden, Xiao Tianyao waved his hand and led the group of black shadows into a withdrawal, plunging Xiao Qie once again into a silence without human voices to rattle his soaring fighting spirit. The rainwater glided across the back of his hands. Xiao Qie could no longer hear the footstep. Heavy rain drenched him thoroughly. Under him, Lang Tao Shui Jin anxiously treaded its hoof. Twang. The sound from the crossbow trigger was very soft, yet Xiao Qie seemed as though he had heard a deafening sound. He suddenly slapped his horse. Lang Tao Shui Jin leaped away, but he rolled off the horse instead. In a flash, there was a succession of thud, thud, thud as a row of short arrows stabbed into the muddied water behind him. Xiao Qie wiped away the rain on his face, only to hear the sounds of twang from all directions. He leaped up at once and darted away. The irritating footsteps followed him relentlessly. An arrow suddenly grazed Xiao Qie's arm. At the same time a gash of blood materialized. He felt a twinge of numbing itch. Anesthetic. They were really treating him like a violent beast to subdue and capture. There was a dip in the terrain ahead. Xiao Qie sprang up with all his might and leaped across the ditch. He had only just landed on his feet when a sudden gust of chilly wind came assaulting him from the side. Xiao Qie seized the momentum to roll forward as a blade hacked down on the spot he was just at. Before the killer could extract his blade, there was a tightness in his throat as Xiao Qie shoved him down into the muddied water and broke his neck. A jumble of arrows stabbed into the tree trunk beside him. Before Xiao Qie could get up, he was suddenly kicked in the back. Caught by surprise by the man behind him, he tumbled into the undergrowth. But in this brief period of oversight, he braced himself against the ground to steady himself. When Xiao Qie got a clear look at the man before him, he licked away the traces of blood between his teeth and called out to him as though they were lovers, "Oh, Lanzhao." Shen Zichuan was also bracing himself on the ground with a hand. A thin blade was sandwiched between his fingers. He stared at Xiao Qie in the rain and pounced. Xiao Qie's palm was next to the hilt of his blade. But unexpectedly, Shen Zichuan was already right before him. The latter slapped back Longly blade with one hand and grabbed the front of Xiao Qie's clothes with the other hand to fling him over to the ground. Mud splashed all over. Xiao Qie hooked his arm around the back of Shen Zichuan's neck and turned the freed Longly blade over and sent it slashing towards Shen Zichuan. Shen Zichuan immediately pressed his body down and came face to face with an upside-down Xiao Qie. The instant their eyes met, he struck the side of Longly blade aside with a lighting move of his hand. Blood droplets on the edge of the blade hit his face and slid along his chin to mingle with the rain before dripping onto the center of Xiao Qie's eyebrows. The imperial bodyguards behind closed in on them. Shen Zichuan wanted to lift his body, but Xiao Qie slid his palm up to press him down until they could almost hear each other's breathing. Panting slightly, Xiao Qie said, "You want to court death with me that much?" But Shen Zichuan bowed his head and said, "Even a wolf will not be able to run anymore once struck by an arrow. Your movements have slowed down by so much. You can't go on anymore, can you?" Xiao Qie's fingers teasingly caressed Shen Zichuan's nape. His thumb slipped to Shen Zichuan's Adam's apple and pressed against it forcefully. "I can still break a neck like this." The thick growth of grass rustled as a human figure bore his way out of it. Without even looking, Shen Zichuan raised his hand to toss out his blade. The other party instantly collapsed to the ground. The killing intent in Shen Zichuan's eyes did not recede, but he pushed away Xiao Qie's touchy-feely hand and dragged him along with him as he slid down the slope. Xiao Tianyao was a little late. By the time he arrived, there were only 2 corpses. He briefly turned them over for a look and plucked the blade from the throat of the dead man. He narrowed his eyes and said, "This doesn't seem to belong to Xiao II. And how did these killers get in? Xiao II is the dog leash to hold Li Bei in check. He cannot die. Wasn't that the fucking consensus?" Chapter 24. Rainy Night. Chapter 24. Rainy night. Lightning flashed and thunder boomed. Rain poured like curtains of waterfalls. Xiao Tianya stood up and handed the blade to the man behind him to put away. He said, "Xiao II has been hit by an arrow. He won't be able to make his escape." At the bottom of the slope, Xiao Qie and Shen Zichuan lay prone in the mud with bated breath. Right this moment, imperial bodyguards were everywhere around them, and there were also unknown assassins in hiding. It would prove to be harder than ascending to heaven for both men to escape. But breaking through the encirclement was even tougher. The most fatal of all was Xiao Qie. His left arm, which the arrow had grazed, was going numb. In just an hour, the drug would spread throughout his body and paralyze him. Xiao Tianya brushed aside the tousled grass with his foot and saw the messy tracks of footprints. He silently raised his hand and pointed down the slope. Behind him, the imperial bodyguards filed out, crouching as they slowly surrounded and edged towards that sunken ditch. Xiao Qie's body tensed as he listened to the approaching sound of men stepping on mud. The hilt of his blade was pressed against his palm. As long as someone jumped down prematurely, he would immediately leap up like a wolf and end the other party in a single blow. The Xiuquan blades had already swung their way to the edge of the slope. Xiao Qie suddenly was stopped by Shen Zichuan, who had grabbed hold of his soaked clothes. He shifted his gaze over and saw Shen Zichuan's calm eyes. Right at this moment, several figures suddenly sprang down in the forest to engage the imperial bodyguards in a battle. Xiao Tianya drew his sword at them and saw a flash of flying blades. Following right after, a few imperial bodyguards toppled to the ground. With their morale boosted, the other party instantly pounced. Once chaos descended above them, Shen Zichuan kept away the few remaining blades he had left. Without needing him to say more, Xiao Qie had already leaped to his feet. He climbed along the muddy slope and rolled into the thick growth of grass on the other side. "Catch them!" Xiao Tianya bellowed. The imperial bodyguards streaked across the air in a retreat. Xiao Qie extended and hung his arms up on a tree trunk and swiftly flipped atop it. Below him, Shen Zichuan had only just reached when the imperial bodyguards behind him arrived too. Like a ferocious tiger springing down the mountain, Xiao Qie swiftly hacked down on them with longly blade like a heated knife cutting through butter, forcing the crowd of imperial bodyguards simultaneously back in a retreat. Xiao Tianya sprang up from behind and brandished his blade to sweep it towards Xiao Qie, who could not retract his own blade in time. Xiao Qie abruptly ducked his head. Then there was a thud, as the edge of Xiao Tianya's blade collided into a sheath. Shen Zichuan pressed his sheath against the other blade. With one foot, he stepped onto Xiao Qie's back, whose powerful lift of his own body raised Shen Zichuan's whole body up to close in towards Xiao Tianya. The thin blade between his fingers on his other hand suddenly went a-sailing towards Xiao Tianya's eyes. Xiao Tianya did not dodge. The imperial bodyguards at both sides swiftly cleaved down their blades to obstruct the attack. Having already gotten up, Xiao Qie lifted his leg to kick Xiao Tianya right in the chest. Both parties retreated in unison. Xiao Tianya flung off the droplets of blood on his blade. The locks of hair before his forehead had already been sliced off by Shen Zichuan earlier. Xiao Qie and Shen Zichuan took 2 steps back. Without even saying a word, they turned and ran. Xiao Tianya stared at their backs and said, "Give chase." Xiao Qie reached out an arm to pull over Shen Zichuan and said, "East." Shen Zichuan brushed aside the stray branches and said, "There's one man in every 5 steps and a squad in every 10. Not to forget there's still the Tuanqing garrison troops in the east." Xiao Qie slowly retracted his arm. He said resolutely and decisively, "The east is the way out. The gate of death is right before us." Shen Zichuan backhandedly tossed out his blade, and the soldier hiding in an ambush in the tree promptly fell headfirst to the ground. When Shen Zichuan passed by him, he conveniently extracted the other party's Xiuquan blade. Xiao Qie backhandedly grasped the hilt of his blade. The next moment, he sliced through the pitch-black night to hold up 2 blades in the rain. He had already lost all sensations in his left arm. Even the fingers on his right hand were now slightly stiff. It would be a tough battle tonight. Shen Zichuan brandished his blade to slay the man, then kicked over the body. As Xiao Qie strode forward, he staggered. He suddenly pressed his chest against Shen Zichuan's back and brought him tumbling into the billowing waves of grass and rolling into the stream. The rain was still falling, and penetratingly cold water scoured their bodies. Xiao Qie's heavy breathing weighed down beside Shen Zichuan's neck, forming a bizarre duality of scalding heat and icy cold. "Killing me won't do you any good." Propping himself on Longly Blade, Xiao Qie raised his body a little. "So I'm counting on you for the rest of the journey." Shen Zichuan wiped his face with the stream water and said, "There's no point in saving you either. You are here to look for Prince Chu." When Xiao Qie heard him, he pinned him down again. "What's to be done? The imperial bodyguards can't ferret him out either. Only I know where he is. You have already missed your opportunity. No doubt the Empress Dowager will fail tonight. Dote on me. I'm your way out." Shen Zichuan looked back, and the tips of both men's noses came face to face with each other. He said coolly, "I'll hack you to death. We can all just die together. You expended so much effort to get out of imprisonment." Xiao Qie said, "Just to die with me in the name of love? You might as well use that mouth to have a chat with Xiao Tianya." Shen Zichuan grasped hold of Xiao Qie's hands with his icy fingertip. The next instant, Longly Blade swept back and beat the pursuing troops back for a moment. Having received an opening, Shen Zichuan lifted his leg to shove Xiao Qie aside. He grabbed Xiuquan Blade with one hand, carried Longly Blade in the other, and calmed his panting caused by the sprint earlier. "Put that life of yours on account." Shen Zichuan looked as Xiao Tianya dashed closer to them and tightened his grip on the blade. "After tonight, I'm your master." Snow-white light glinted in the ink-like night. Without giving Xiao Tianya the chance to speak, Shen Zichuan slashed down on him head-on. Sprays of water splashed along with his footsteps. Every single one of Shen Zichuan's blow was deadly. As blades collided, the edge of his Xiuchuan blade was damaged. Qiao Tianya flung it aside with his own blade and sent it flying. The two men instantly separated. Shen Zichuan's empty left hand soaked in the stream water, which washed away the blood that had trickled down. A beauty should sit high behind a curtain in a pavilion. Tu Qiao Tianya looked as though he had caught a whiff of some scent. Carrying a blade will hurt the hands. What if you break them? Shen Zichuan weighed Longly blade with his right hand. Isn't breaking my hands and legs just the thing to make me compliant? There is a kind of people in this world who cannot be provoked. Qiao Tianya said. Men like you who can even be ruthless to your own self. Shen Zichuan strode forward to attack. Longly blade was heavy, so he could not wield it smoothly and effortlessly enough. But being heavy had its own advantage. Just like how Qiao Tianyao was now too occupied to counteract his blows as he relied on the forcefulness of the Ji clan blade technique to hack away at the former. As Qiao Tianya retreated, the pressure almost made him fold over backwards. However, the moment he drew near to the stream, he had an ill sense of foreboding. Sure enough, he saw Shen Zichuan's injured left hand suddenly splashed up from the water. The dirty mud spattered into Qiao Tianya's eyes, causing him to momentarily expose a weak point. Then, his chest received yet another heavy blow as Shen Zichuan kicked him down and sent him crashing into the stream. When reinforcements arrived, Shen Zichuan retreated a few steps. He would definitely not persist in engaging in combat, so he started dragging Xiao Qie in an attempt to leave. How could he have expected Xiao Qie to be so tall with such long legs that he could barely hoist him away? The search intensified, and time passed particularly slowly. Everyone they found in the entire forest was all smokescreens. What's more, they were well-trained men who would give their lives for the cause. Once they fell into the imperial bodyguards' hands, they would take their own lives by biting off their tongues to deny Ji Lei of the chance to interrogate them. Exactly where was Prince Chu? Only Xiao Qie knew. Little bastard! Somewhat frustrated, Ji Lei rose to his feet to survey the place. Get Tuanqing garrison troops search along the hunting grounds. Shen Zichuan climbed out of the water and dragged Xiao Qie out. But this slope was too steep. He bit down on Xiao Qie's back collar and hauled, finally dragging him up. The wound on Shen Zichuan's left hand bled incessantly. He tore his clothes, rinsed it in the water, and wrapped it around the wound. Xiao Qie leaned against the moss-covered rock and said, "There's a handkerchief in my bosom." Shen Zichuan reached into the clothes on his chest and fished out a handkerchief that was a pile of mud. He squeezed out all the muddy water onto Xiao Qie's chest. Xiao Qie asked, "When will the effects of this drug pass?" 2 hours. Soon. Crouching in a tree is better than taking cover in the water. Xiao Qie looked at him and saw that he was soaked to the skin. His back collar was slightly open, and there were still specks of mud on his neck. The contrast between them was very. The imperial bodyguards have offices for domesticating beasts. Animals can smell the scent of blood. As Shen Zichuan spoke, he lowered his head and took a light sniff of the fingertip that had bled earlier. Very seductive. Xiao Qie watched him. What sorcery was this? This man was still wielding a blade to kill earlier, and he wasn't acting like a woman, so why had he thought of such a term? He must have really been possessed by Li Jianheng. Harp, harp, harp. The latter had kept harping on and on about this every day that even he himself had come to think and see it this way, just like those old men in Kudu with their special fetishes. Your swordsmanship is pretty good. Xiao Qie's gaze looked as though they could peel off Shen Zichuan's back collar. You must have trained hard in the temple. And yet one can't tell from your body's physical appearance alone. Did you use medicine on yourself? Shen Zichuan looked askance at him. Following his gaze, he raised his hand to touch the back of his neck. He asked in response, "How many times a day do you have to look at it? Are you that obsessed with it?" Xiao Qia licked the residual taste of blood with the tip of his tongue and said, "The way you put it is so ambiguous. You make it sound like I'm a lecherous ghost." Shen Zichuan reached over and covered Xiao Qia's face with the dirty handkerchief and said, "I thought you only fool around with women and courtesans. I never expect you to have a taste for both men and women." Xiao Qia said, "What's this flirting? This second young master just wants you to wipe the mud off your neck. Do you want me to wipe it?" With the handkerchief serving as a partition, Shen Zichuan's fingertips stopped between Xiao Qia's eyebrows. "Or do you want to wipe it for me?" Icy cold rainwater trickled down along his fingers and dripped between Xiao Qia's eyebrows. As if they had fully absorbed that alluring temptation, the droplets that dripped all blossomed into ripples of water that flowed tide after tide into his collar, stirring up in him a wet, ticklish restlessness. Xiao Qia wanted very much to drink some water. At the same time, he wanted Shen Zichuan to stay a little farther away from him. After a moment of silence, he smiled and said, "You sure are something. You think too much." Shen Zichuan tightened his collar around him, held his blade, and spoke no further. The rain gradually abated. The barking of hounds in the woods rang out from afar. Neither man moved. This rock was propped against the side of the stream, and it was covered with shrubs above. It was an exceptionally small and narrow hiding place, large enough for just one man. Xiao Qia waited for quite a while, listening as the man leading the hound closed in on them. Shen Zichuan wedged Longly blade in midair, and crouched over to climb his way in from below. Xiao Qia felt a weight on his body as that man edged along his legs to his chest. Both men squeezed, body to body, into this narrow space. Xiao Qia could feel the heat of their thighs rubbing against each other when the other man straddled him. He could also feel the latter's breathing as he leaned in close beside his temple. Xiao Qia covered his eyes. In the darkness, he could freely visualize Shen Zichuan's posture. He could not shake off the image of that white as lotus root neck either. "I beg of you," Xiao Qia sighed. "Sit on my stomach. Don't sit farther down." Shen Zichuan did not move, because the rustling sound above came closer. Xiao Qia adjusted his breathing. But if he raised his head up in this posture, he could touch Shen Zichuan's chin. Move down a little, and the tip of his nose could nuzzle along the contour of that neck. Shen Zichuan was originally listening attentively to the movements when he suddenly lifted Xiao Qia's handkerchief to look at him without saying a word. Xiao Qia was also looking at Shen Zichuan. He did not know if the scent of blood tonight had gone to his head, or whatever it was that was going on. In any case, that gradually hardening part of his was pressing up against the man above. It made both men uncomfortable. Fabrics that had been soaked through by rainwater clung so closely to their skins that it was akin to physical contact between bare skins. It was as if he shifted just a little more, he would be intentionally creating friction to ignite a fire. The hound above was still sniffing around.